Hello everyone and welcome back to the Horror Hut. Before you drift off, it would be a nice idea if you could leave a comment to let me know where you are listening from. Please don't forget to give the video a like and subscribe to the channel. Right, let's get comfy and relaxed, and let's begin. Story 1, Buried Secrets of the Frozen Night. The storm had begun quietly, a faint whisper that brushed against the window panes of my cabin like an intruder testing the threshold. I had spent the previous weeks preparing for winter, stocking up on firewood and provisions, but nothing could have prepared me for what was about to unfold. The weather forecast had hinted at a flurry, a light dusting across the mountains, but the reality was far more sinister. By daybreak, the world beyond the glass was swallowed by an oppressive blanket of white. I stood at the window, my breath fogging the glass as I watched the snow dance in the wind. Each flake twirled and twirled until it settled, a seemingly peaceful sight. Yet, the eerie silence that enveloped the cabin felt like an omen. I pulled away from the window and stoked the fire in the hearth, feeling its warmth wrap around me like a protective cloak. Alone in the solitude of the woods, I had always thought I relished the quiet. Today, however, it felt stifling. The first flakes had been gentle, but by noon, the storm intensified, ferocious gusts howling like restless spirits. I settled into the armchair with a book, my usual remedy for the incessant solitude. Yet as I read, the words blurred together, and my mind drifted to darker thoughts. The cabin, once a sanctuary, began to feel more like a prison. I could almost hear the wind's mocking laughter, taunting me from outside. The hours slipped by, the sun vanishing behind a thick curtain of clouds, and dusk arrived without warning. I stood to peek outside again, alarmed to see that the snow had reached the porch steps, almost as if it wanted to creep inside. My heart raced as shadows flickered in the corners of my vision. I shook my head, dismissing the paranoia that had begun to sink in with the twilight. As night fell, I lit lanterns throughout the cabin, their warm glow flickering against the growing darkness. The wind howled louder now, a relentless beast trying to breach the walls of my home. I tried to drown it out with music, the crackling of the fire, and the steady thump of my own heartbeat. Yet, the isolation wrapped around me like a suffocating shroud. At some point during the night, a loud crash jolted me from my thoughts. I sprang from the chair, the book falling from my lap. My heart raced as I searched for the source of the sound. The wind had grown even more agitated, and the cabin creaked ominously, but it wasn't just that. Something outside had broken the stillness, a sound that felt distinctly like a thud against the wooden side of my cabin. I gripped the edge of the table, fighting the urge to retreat into the safety of the shadows. I peered through the window, straining to see past the curtain of falling snow. The world outside was a swirling vortex, white and black, and nothing seemed to be moving. Just as I turned away, a fleeting figure caught my eye. I swore I saw a shape, a human or something that once had been human, lurching toward the cabin. My breath caught in my throat. I blinked, certain that I had imagined it. I cursed myself for letting the isolation gnaw at my mind. After all, it was probably just a deer, the storm displacing wildlife. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself, but the wild thumping of my heart refused to relent. Just then, there was a knock, a solid, insistent knock at the door. It echoed through the cabin, sending chills racing down my spine. Who would be out here in this storm? I let my gaze drift back to the window, but the shape had vanished, swallowed by the white abyss. Hesitation gripped me like a vice. If it was a person in need, I couldn't turn my back. But what if it wasn't? Hello? I called out, my voice wavering in the stillness. There was no reply, just the howling wind and the soft, eerie creaking of the cabin settling further into the night. I approached the door cautiously, every instinct urging me to turn back. The knock came again, more desperate this time, rattling the wooden frame. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the doorknob. Was it worth the risk? I steeled myself and pulled it open just a crack. The storm rushed in, a furious gust that nearly slammed the door shut again. I squinted into the swirling snow, searching for a face, but all I saw was shadow and blizzard. "Who's there?" I called again, louder this time. "Help," a voice croaked, barely audible over the wind. It was a tortured sound, desperate and raw. My heart sank. I could hear the fear in that one word. "Stay there," I shouted, shoving the door open wider. "I'll get you inside." As I peered into the storm, a figure materialized from the sheets of snow. A man stumbled forward, his clothes tattered, face pale and gaunt. His eyes were wide and terrified, as if he had just escaped from a nightmare. I grabbed his arm, pulling him into the warmth of the cabin. The storm shrieked outside, and the door slammed shut behind us with a heavy thud, sealing me in with a stranger who looked as though he'd walked straight out of hell. "God, you need to tell me what happened," I urged, urgency bubbling to the surface. But as I studied his face, the words caught in my throat. He wasn't just scared, he was haunted. The howling wind clawed at the house like a restless beast, the sound echoing through the empty rooms. I stood in the dim light of the living room, staring out the window at the swirling mass of snow that had turned my once quiet street into an unrecognizable white abyss. It had been 3 days since the storm began, and the world outside was a ghostly portrait of isolation. I felt like a solitary figure trapped in some forgotten painting, surrounded by a thick blanket of silence that was occasionally shattered by the wind's mournful wail. I had tried to keep myself busy, but the weight of the storm pressed heavily on my chest. I found myself pacing the creaking floorboards, waiting for the moment when the power would flicker and die, leaving me with only a flashlight's narrow beam to pierce the shadows. The house felt alive in the storm's grip, every creak and groan echoing like a warning. I could hardly shake the feeling that something was watching me through the storm, waiting for the right moment to breach the thin veil of safety I'd wrapped around myself. Dinner had been a half-hearted affair. I'd reheated the last of the soup, but the warmth of the bowl was swallowed by the chill that seeped from the walls. I sat at the table, staring at the empty chair across from me, feeling the absence of my sister, Clara. She should have been here, laughing at my attempts to make a meal out of canned goods. Instead, I was alone, and the quiet seemed to stretch like a taut wire, ready to snap. By nightfall, the snow had begun to pile high against the windows, the wind creating eerie shapes that danced against the glass. I drew the curtains tightly, trying to shut out the howling that echoed in the empty rooms. The candle I lit flickered, casting long shadows that twisted and writhed on the walls. I clutched the old wooden chair, a habit I had developed in my anxiety, feeling the splintered edges dig into my palm. The storm had come so suddenly. Just 3 days ago, the sun had bathed the town in golden light. Clara and I had planned to go ice skating at the old pond, the one our parents used to take us to when we were children. But the forecast had turned, and before we knew it, the snow had begun to fall in thick, white sheets. Clara hadn't made it home that night, and I still hadn't received any word. My phone had long since run out of battery, its lifeless screen a constant reminder of my isolation. The landline had been dead for hours, and I cursed the day I had decided not to invest in a generator. I couldn't shake the feeling that the storm was more than just a winter anomaly. The air felt charged, heavy with anticipation, and I found myself glancing at the door more often than not, expecting it to burst open at any moment, revealing something that lay hidden in the snow. As the clock ticked past midnight, a loud thud jolted me from my thoughts. The sound resonated through the house, a hollow echo that made my heart race. I stood frozen in place, eyes wide, straining to hear any further disturbance. The wind had begun to lighten, but now it had given way to a new noise, one that didn't belong to the storm. Footsteps. I was certain of it. There were distinct crunches against the snow, muffled but undeniably present. They came in slow, deliberate intervals, like a predator stalking its prey. I grabbed the flashlight, my fingers trembling, and crept towards the front door. My heart thundered in my chest, drowning out the thumping of the wind. Had someone ventured out into the storm, or was this more? The door was locked, but it felt like a flimsy barrier against the imminent dread that threatened to engulf me. I crouched by the peephole, my breath hot against the cold glass. Outside was a swirling cloud of white, the snow blurring everything beyond the threshold. I strained to see, searching for a glimpse of whoever or whatever was out there. The footsteps stopped, and a heavy silence settled over the house. My breath quickened, fear coiling tight in my gut. I waited, holding my breath as if that would protect me. Then, just as suddenly as they had appeared, the rustling began again, but this time it was accompanied by a faint, desperate voice, muffled by the storm. "Help, please." My heart sank. Clara? No, it couldn't be. I was losing my mind, trapped in this storm. But the voice echoed again, a chilling plea that pierced through the ice in my veins. It was not just a figment of my imagination. It was real, desperate, and begging for assistance. "Help, please." It repeated, softer this time, as if it were fading. I felt an irresistible pull toward the door, an urge to fling it open and rescue whoever was out there. A surge of guilt washed over me at the thought of my sister, alone in the raging storm. But then doubt crept in. What if this was a trap? What if it was something far worse, waiting to lure me into the storm, into the darkness? I hesitated, caught in an agonizing battle between instinct and fear. The voice called out again, more frantic, and I realized I couldn't ignore it. I needed to know. I unlatched the door, the cold air rushing in like an unwelcome specter. My heart raced as I pushed it open, the wind slamming it against the wall. I stepped out into the blizzard, the world spinning around me in a dizzying whirl of white. The cold bit at my cheeks, but the warmth of urgency burned within. "Clara?" I shouted over the roar of the storm. The wind swallowed my voice, but I pressed onward, my eyes straining against the flurry. "Help, please." The voice was closer now, almost within reach. I stumbled forward, the snow rising to my knees, and I felt an unsettling sensation that I wasn't alone. And then it hit me, somewhere within the flurry of white, something loomed, shrouded in shadow, watching with intent. The snowstorm howled like a furious beast, its winds rattling the shutters of my childhood home. I had returned to this isolated cabin in the woods only days ago, seeking solace and a break from the suffocating city life. Now, as I sat in front of the old fireplace, the flickering flames cast eerie shadows across the wooden walls, each one dancing as if alive. I could feel the walls closing in, the ominous atmosphere tightening around me like a vice. It had started innocently enough, just a light snowfall that quickly escalated into a raging tempest. The power flickered and died hours ago, leaving me reliant on the dwindling firewood. I wrapped a blanket around my shoulders, but the chill seeped deep into my bones. Outside, the wind screamed, drowning out any comfort the crackling flames might have provided. It was a reminder I was utterly alone in this forsaken place. Earlier that day, I had ventured outside, hoping to find solace beneath the thick pines. With each step, I sank into the white powder, the cold biting at my exposed skin. The world around me had taken on an otherworldly glow, the snow reflecting the weak light of the sun that tried and failed to break through the thick clouds. But the beauty of it all faded once I noticed the absence of sound. The usual cacophony of rustling leaves and distant animal calls was smothered beneath layers of snow, leaving an oppressive silence that unsettled my thoughts. I had taken to exploring the nearby woods, convinced I could dismiss the whispers that danced on the edges of my consciousness. The cabin was steeped in memories, some comforting, others painful. The last time I had visited was years ago, long after my father's passing. He had loved the winter, the snow, I often imagined him out there, carving out a path through the drifts for me to follow, his laughter echoing in the air. Now, that laughter echoed back only as mockery. As twilight descended, the storm intensified, and without the sun's warmth, the cabin felt even more desolate. The howling winds grew louder, punctuated by the occasional thump of snow falling from the branches. It reminded me of the stories my father used to tell me, tales of lost souls wandering the woods, trapped in an endless blizzard, forever searching for their way home. I shook my head, trying to dismiss the creeping dread pooling in my stomach. Then came the noise, a soft thud against the door. I froze, my heart racing. The storm drowned everything else, but this sound was unmistakable, distinct against the howling wind. I tried convincing myself it was merely branches, the weight of the snow causing them to break, but a part of me felt it was something more sinister. I edged closer to the door, my breath hitching in my throat. Another thud. It was followed by a dragging sound, slow and deliberate, like something heavy being pulled across the floorboards outside. My fingers trembled as I reached for the doorknob, the cold metal biting into my skin. The thought of what lay on the other side sent a shiver down my spine. "Hello?" I called out, my voice barely audible above the storm. I strained to listen, hoping for a reply, but there was nothing. Only the relentless winds howled back at me, mocking my fright. After a moment that felt like an eternity, I pulled the door open a crack, the old hinges creaking in protest. The swirling white outside blurred my vision, but I could make out the outline of something dark against the snow. My pulse raced as I pushed the door further, peering into the chaos. Nothing. Just an endless expanse of white, the storm swallowing everything whole. I took a hesitant step outside, the snow crunching beneath my boots. The air was thick with cold, and I wrapped my arms around myself, trying to ward off the chill that began to settle deep in my bones. I scanned the area, half expecting to find someone seeking refuge from the storm. The trees loomed around me, tall and menacing, their trunks covered in a thick layer of frost. I felt a strange compulsion to venture further, to find out what had made the noise. The storm whispered secrets I couldn't quite grasp, and I felt tethered to its madness. I took a deep breath, stepping into the woods, the snow rising to my ankles. The further I walked, the more the storm seemed to swallow sound, creating a cocoon of silence around me. My heartbeat thudded in my ears, drowning everything else. I called out again, this time a little louder, but only silence answered me. Then, suddenly, I saw it, a figure flitting between the trees. My stomach churned, panic rising as I blinked in disbelief. I couldn't tell if it was real, the storm distorting my senses. It moved too quickly, disappearing behind a thick trunk before I could process what I had seen. Was it a trick of the light? My imagination? Or something far worse? I turned back toward the cabin, a sense of urgency propelling me forward, but the snow loomed higher now, dragging at my legs like a predator. I stumbled through the deep drifts, the howling wind carrying a voice that sounded eerily like my own, calling my name. As I neared the cabin, I glanced back, half expecting to see the figure emerge, but the woods remained silent, the dark shadows holding their secrets close. I swung the door shut behind me, the gust of wind pressing against the frame as if begging to enter. I leaned against it, panting, the warmth of the fire beckoning me back. Yet the unease coiling around my chest remained. I could no longer shake the feeling that I was not as alone as I had thought. Something lurked just beyond the threshold of my vision, and as the storm raged on outside, it felt like it was only a matter of time before it would find its way in. The storm raged on for hours, a relentless howling that filled the night with a cacophony of despair. Each gust of wind seemed to carry a whisper, taunting me with the thought that I was not as alone as I wished to believe. The snow fell in thick, wet clumps, obscuring the world outside my window, transforming the familiar landscape into a featureless void. I had never truly understood the depth of isolation until that night. I huddled beneath a pile of blankets, the flicker of the candle casting elongated shadows against the walls of my small cabin. I had already lost count of how many candles I had lit in a fruitless attempt to fend off the gathering darkness. The air in the cabin felt thick, almost suffocating, as if the storm outside were pressing in on me, trying to breach the flimsy walls that had once felt like a sanctuary. I stared at the walls, seeking comfort in their familiarity, but all I found were the jagged scars of wood and nails, each crevice a reminder of the life I had left behind. I thought of my friends, my family, each one safely tucked away in their homes, oblivious to my plight. A bitter laugh escaped my lips. Perhaps they were better off not knowing. The wind howled louder, a banshee's wail that sent chills crawling up my spine. I clutched the blanket tighter around me, feeling the fabric dampen against my sweat-soaked skin. How long had it been since I had heard a voice? Felt the warmth of another being? I couldn't remember. It felt as if I was the last person on Earth, marooned in a snowbound nightmare. As the minutes crawled by, I tried to distract myself with thoughts of escape. I envisioned the door, the way it would creak open under my touch, leading me into a world that still existed beyond the storm. I imagined the crisp bite of the frigid air, the thrill of running through the snow towards safety. But each time I considered it, an image of the darkness beyond chilled me to the bone. I had heard the stories of those who ventured out in blizzards, only to become lost, swallowed whole by the white abyss. There was a sudden loud crack from the roof, the sound echoing in the stillness, and my heart raced. I dropped the blanket and stood, moving toward the window. The glass was fogged over with condensation, but I could make out the shape of the world beyond, blurred and distorted. It was then that I saw it, a figure, barely visible in the swirling snow. My breath hitched as I pressed my face against the glass, trying to focus. It was fleeting, a fleeting glimpse of something moving. My heart pounded in my chest. I stepped back, the wooden floor creaking beneath my weight. Had I imagined it? The storm played tricks on the mind, distorting reality with its relentless fury. I shook my head, trying to dispel the shadows gathering in my thoughts. It was just a storm. But then, a hollow knock echoed through the cabin, cutting through the wind. A heartbeat of silence followed, and I froze. The sound had come from the door. I felt the warmth drain from my body, leaving only the cold grip of fear. I should have called out, asked who it was, but my throat tightened around the words. Another knock, this one harder, thumping against the wood like a warning. I backed away from the door, my heart racing. Perhaps it was a neighbor, someone seeking shelter from the storm. But the cabin was remote, far from any other house, and I had not seen another soul for days. The knocking came again, relentless, as if whatever was on the other side was desperate to get in. I grabbed a candle, the flame flickering wildly, and took a cautious step toward the door. My hand hovered over the latch, trembling. Should I open it? What if it was a trap? Just as I thought to bolt the door, the storm outside howled once more, drowning out the sound of the knocking. I stood frozen, a battle raging in my mind between fear and curiosity. I had to know. With a deep breath, I turned the latch and slowly opened the door, wincing as the cold air rushed in, biting at my skin. The snow swirled around the threshold, and for a moment, I saw nothing but the darkness. Then, from the haze, a figure emerged, half hidden by the storm. My heart stopped as I recognized the silhouette. It was someone I knew, or at least someone I had known. "Help me," came the ragged voice, barely audible over the wind. But it wasn't a voice I expected, nor a face I wanted to see. It was Jamie, my childhood friend, her clothes soaked and her eyes wide with terror. I glanced at the storm, back at Jamie, and all I could feel was a dread that churned in my stomach. Jamie? I could hardly breathe the name. "How are you here?" I thought. "Please, let me in," she cried, her voice cracking like the ice forming outside. I stepped aside, instinctively reaching out to pull her inside. As she stumbled over the threshold, I caught a glimpse behind her. A shadow moved against the swirling snow, just beyond the door. My blood ran cold. I slammed the door shut, locking it against the storm, against whatever had followed her in the depths of the night. I turned to face Jamie, whose face was pale and streaked with tears. "Why are you here?" I asked, my voice trembling. "I can't explain." "They're coming," she gasped, her words tumbling out in ragged breaths. "Who is coming?" But I already knew. And as the wind howled outside, the shadows of my fears loomed ever closer, creeping into the corners of my mind, feeding on the storm. The snowstorm continued to howl outside, a relentless beast that clawed at the windows and howled down the chimney. I had long lost track of time, but the oppressive weight of the storm suggested it was deep into the night. I sat on the worn armchair, my back pressed against the fraying upholstery, staring blankly at the flickering candlelight that danced on the walls. The power had gone out hours ago, and the darkness felt like a living entity, creeping in from the corners of each room, pulling me into its cold embrace. I had settled into a kind of uneasy calm, a stark contrast to the frantic panic I had felt earlier when I realized I was completely alone in the old cabin. I had come here thinking it would be a quiet retreat, a chance to gather my thoughts and escape the chaos of my life. Now, it felt like a trap, the walls closing in on me as the snow piled higher outside. It had become a prison of my own making. The wind shrieked again, cutting through the silence, rising in intensity. I thought of Samantha, my sister, who had urged me to stay with her instead. I should have listened. Thoughts of her laughter echoed in my mind, and I remembered her voice warning me about the storm. "Stay put, Jake. Don't go out there. Just wait it out." But I hadn't heeded her advice, thinking I could brave the elements to gather supplies from town. That thought was now a distant memory, buried under the heavy blanket of snow that had swallowed the roads. Outside, the world had transformed into an alien landscape, the snow falling in blinding sheets that rendered everything unrecognizable. The cabin had felt warm and inviting when I first arrived, but now the walls felt as if they were encroaching, whispering secrets in the language of creaks and groans. I could swear I heard something beneath the howling wind, a sound that didn't belong, or rustling, almost like footsteps in the snow. My heart raced, and I tightened my grip around the candle, the only source of light in this suffocating darkness. Another gust shook the windows, and I glanced toward the door. The latch held tight, yet the unease curled around my stomach like a serpent. I had crossed the threshold into isolation, and now it felt as if I had crossed into something far more sinister. I stood up, my legs unsteady from sitting too long, and approached the door, peering out into the swirling snow. The visibility was almost zero, the world outside a swirling chaos of white. I remembered the stories my grandmother used to tell about travelers lost in storms, disappearing into the blizzard, never to return. Had I inadvertently invited that fate upon myself? I shook my head, driving the thoughts away. I was being foolish, letting my mind get the better of me. Just as I turned back toward the candlelight, a loud crack echoed through the cabin, followed by a sharp thud. I froze, every nerve ending on high alert. There it was again, something heavy hitting the roof. My heart beat in my ears, drowning out the wind. Instinctively, I moved toward the fireplace, the shadows swirling around me like restless spirits. I grabbed the poker, its comforting weight filling me with a false sense of security. Another thud, louder this time, followed by a slide, as if something had fallen. My breath quickened. It was impossible. I was alone. No one could have made it here in this storm. The door had been bolted tight. I had checked it twice. The candle flickered again, nearly extinguishing, and I gripped it tighter, the wax warm against my palm. "It's just a storm," I whispered to myself, more for reassurance than belief. I forced my feet to move, inching toward the source of the noise, the fire casting erratic shadows that seemed to flicker with a life of their own. Then, I heard it, a whisper, soft yet distinctly audible above the wind. I stopped, my breath hitching in my throat. It was a voice, a soft, mournful sound that sent ice through my veins. I strained to listen, to discern the words, but the wind carried them away like smoke. "Help me." I nearly dropped the candle. It felt impossibly close, crawling up my spine and twisting my stomach. The sound swelled within me like a dark tide, and without thinking, I moved toward the door, instinctively drawn to whatever lay beyond. Should I open it? The thought filled me with dread. I stood there, frozen, my heart hammering as a new realization gripped me. If someone were out there, lost in the storm, I should help them. But the stories of wanderers lured into the depths of the snow also echoed in my mind. I was faced with a choice, to risk my safety or to remain safely ensconced in the cabin, potentially abandoning another soul to the storm's wrath. Before I could decide, the whisper came again. "Please. Help." I grasped the door handle, hesitating for a heartbeat before yanking it open, the wind rushing in like a wild animal. The light from my candle barely pierced the darkness outside, but I thought I saw a figure stumbling through the snow. My instinct screamed at me to retreat, but I couldn't ignore that voice, that desperate plea. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding small and weak against the howling winds. "Are you there?" The figure turned, and in that instant, I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. It was like ice water in my veins, a knowing dread that I had just made a grave mistake. The storm raged on, and as the door slammed shut behind me, I stepped out into the blizzard, the darkness swallowing me whole. Story 2, Last Stop Before the Darkness. The headlights of my car cut through the thick night, illuminating a narrow stretch of road flanked by dense trees that loomed like silent sentinels. The pavement glimmered with moisture left by a recent rain, and I tightened my grip on the steering wheel. The radio sputtered static, the occasional hiss of a distant station breaking the silence. I hadn't seen a soul for miles, which was unnerving in itself, but I was running low on gas and badly needed to refuel. When the gas station finally appeared, it was like a beacon in the darkness. The neon sign flickered erratically, its glow barely managing to push back the shadows that enveloped the place. The station looked old, its age evident in the rust on the edges of the metal canopy and the cracked tiles of the forecourt. It seemed oddly out of place, as though it had been frozen in time. A single pump stood sentry, and I could see a figure moving slowly inside the convenience store, their features obscured by the dim light. I pulled up to the pump, the engine of my old sedan sputtering before falling silent. The atmosphere was oppressive, a weight pressing down on my chest as I stepped out into the cool night air. The faint scent of gasoline mingled with something rancid, and I hesitated for a moment, scanning the area. There wasn't a soul in sight, just the distant sound of insects and the rustling leaves. Pushing open the door to the store, I was greeted by a bell that jingled above me, its sound echoing off the peeling walls. The figure I had seen earlier was behind the counter, a woman who appeared to be in her 60s. Her hair was unkempt, streaks of gray forming a disheveled halo around her weathered face. She glanced up at me, her eyes narrowing with a wariness that made my skin crawl. "Evening," I said, forcing a smile. She didn't respond, her gaze lingering on me for a moment longer before she returned to whatever she had been doing. I stepped further inside, the fluorescent bulbs flickering overhead, casting an unsettling light across the aisles lined with dusty snacks and outdated magazines. The atmosphere felt thick, almost suffocating, and I could hear the slow, rhythmic ticking of a clock somewhere in the back. I made my way to the cooler, grabbing a bottle of water to quench my thirst. As I turned to head back to the counter, I noticed a series of odd posters on the wall, faded images of missing persons splattered with ink details about each case. My heart started to race as I took in the Eerie collection, their faces staring out at me from the wall as if begging to be remembered. "Fill up your tank?" The woman's voice broke through my thoughts, rough like gravel. I nodded, conscious of the fact that she had positioned herself behind the counter, her fingers gripping the edge as though it were a lifeline. "Yeah, just a pump outside," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. She nodded slowly, the wheels of her mind turning in a way that made me feel more like a specimen than a customer. I stepped back outside, the chill of the night wrapping around me like a cloak. The pump whirred to life as I inserted the nozzle into my tank, the sound of gasoline gurgling against metal oddly comforting. But as I stood there, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I glanced back at the store, where the woman had returned to her task, but her eyes were fixed on me once more. As I waited for the tank to fill, my mind wandered. I thought about the road ahead, the fatigue that had settled deep in my bones, and the gnawing feeling that something was terribly off. The clock in the store ticked louder in the silence, each heartbeat echoing in my ears. When the pump clicked off, I pulled the nozzle out and hung it back up, taking a moment to shake off the prickle of unease that had settled over me. I returned to the store, water bottle in hand, and set it on the counter beside the woman. "How much is the gas?" I asked, trying to break the tension. "$25, she replied, her voice flat, void of any warmth. I handed her a $20 bill and a few coins, my eyes darting back to the missing persons posters. Something about them gnawed me, as if they were alive with secrets I was not meant to uncover. "You're not from around here, are you?" she asked, a hint of something sharper lurking behind her words. "No," I admitted, too tired to play games. "Just passing through." "Ah," she said, her eyes narrowing again as she looked me over. "Watch yourself out there. Not many people about at this hour." "Yeah, I've noticed," I replied, forcing a laugh that fell flat. I turned to leave, but her voice stopped me. "Just remember, not everything goes back to normal after dark." I felt a chill creep down my spine as I turned away, the bell above the door jingling ominously. The night outside seemed darker, the shadows shifting unnaturally. I stepped back into the hollow silence of the forecourt, my heart racing. The car felt like a sanctuary as I climbed back in. I locked the doors, glancing in the rearview mirror as I started the engine. The woman stood in the doorway of the store, her face a mask of shadow, watching me until I pulled away. I made a quick turn to leave, the gas station receding into the dark, leaving behind a sense of foreboding that clung to me like a second skin. As I drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had escaped something that lingered in the stifling air of that gas station, waiting silently for its next visitor. The bell above the gas station door chimed softly as I stepped inside, a sound incongruent with the muffled sense of unease that still clung to me. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, flickering with a rhythmic persistence, casting an unwelcoming glow on the dimly lit interior. I hesitated for a moment, the lingering image of the old man on the payphone replaying in my mind, his call to the unknown echoing in my ears. The air was thick with the scent of stale coffee and motor oil, an oddly comforting combination that momentarily distracted me. I walked towards the counter, where a young woman, no older than 20, sat slouched over a magazine. Her hair was dark and tangled, and her eyes were rimmed with fatigue as she vaguely acknowledged my presence with a nod. "Anything I can help you with?" she asked, her voice monotone. I cleared my throat, suddenly aware of how dry my mouth felt. "I just need to pay for gas." "Pump 3. She flipped her magazine closed but didn't bother to look up as she reached for the register. "That'll be 15 even." I fished out a crumpled 20 and slid it across the counter, noting the way her fingers brushed against the bill without any hint of curiosity or acknowledgement. I watched as she punched the numbers into the register, her movements mechanical, almost as if she were trapped in a repeating loop. "Do you have a bathroom?" I asked, feeling an urgent need to escape the oppressive atmosphere. She gestured vaguely toward a door in the back, her attention already drifting back to the glossy pages of her magazine. I nodded, grateful for the direction, and made my way towards the restroom. Each step felt heavy, as if the very floorboards resisted my movements. The hallway leading to the bathroom was dimly lit, the walls a dingy beige, peeling in places like old paint on a forgotten canvas. As I pushed the door open, the hinges creaked ominously, and I entered the small, grimy space. The flickering light above did little to mask the layers of grime that clung to the sink and toilet. I washed my hands, the cold water grounding me momentarily, but as I glanced into the cracked mirror, I caught sight of a figure reflected behind me. I whipped around, heart racing, but found only the empty corridor stretched behind me. I took a deep breath, chastising myself for being jumpy. It was just my overactive imagination, a product of the unsettling circumstances since I had left home. I needed to focus, to shake off the nagging sense of dread that seemed to follow me like a shadow. I washed my hands again, splashing water on my face, trying to wipe away the creeping sensation of paranoia. Returning to the main area of the gas station, I noticed the young woman was no longer at the counter. A sense of foreboding washed over me, and I scanned the dimly lit aisles, the towering shelves sagging under the weight of their dusty inventory. The soft hum of the refrigerator units filled the silence, but the absence of her presence felt like an uninvited chill. "Hello?" I called, my voice echoing slightly in the confined space. No answer came, just the faint sound of the wind whistling outside, a reminder of the growing storm. I shuffled through the aisles, half-heartedly glancing at the products, all outdated snacks and drinks displaying faded labels. I considered the possibility of leaving, but my car had barely made it to the gas station, and I didn't want to risk being stranded in the middle of nowhere. "Is someone back there?" I asked, raising my voice slightly, but still a little self-conscious. The silence enveloped me, thick and suffocating. After a few more moments of hesitation, I ventured towards the door labeled "Employees Only." My pulse quickened as I pushed it open, revealing a narrow back room cluttered with boxes and old equipment. The flickering overhead light cast strange shadows that danced across the walls, warping the space into something disorienting. "Hello?" My voice cracked, and I fought the urge to call out again. The room was empty, but I sensed a presence, something lurking just out of sight. The sound of a door creaking caught my attention. I turned sharply, my heart pounding, but nothing stood behind me. My breath quickened, and I stepped further into the room, my instinct screaming at me to turn back. A lull hum filled the air, and my gaze landed on an old radio perched on a shelf, its static crackling intermittently. I reached for it, curiosity pushing me forward. As soon as my fingers brushed against the dial, a sudden chill ran down my spine. I hesitated, an inexplicable dread taking hold, but I twisted the knob anyway. The static gave way to a distorted voice, barely audible but laced with urgency. "Help! They're here. Don't trust." The voice cut off abruptly, replaced again by static. I stumbled backward, the radio slipping from my hands and crashing to the floor, shattering the eerie silence. I stood frozen for a moment, the weight of what I had just heard pressing down on me. The storm outside had intensified, the wind howling as I realized I was not alone. I could feel it now, a palpable energy lurking in the shadows, something watchful, something hungry. My instinct screamed at me to flee, and I turned, racing towards the exit, the echo of my footsteps following me like a warning. As I burst through the front door and into the rain-soaked night, I half expected to find something waiting for me, but the gas station stood silent, a dark sentinel against the storm. My car was still there, but as I fumbled with the keys, a shadow flickered in my peripheral vision. I looked up, breath hitching, and found the old man from before staring at me from the edge of the lot, his eyes glinting in the dim light, a knowing smile creeping across his face. "Don't trust them," he whispered, voice carried away by the wind, and just as quickly as he had appeared, he melted into the shadows. An icy dread settled in my chest. Something was wrong here, and I had a sinking feeling I had only begun to scratch the surface. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a sickly yellow hue across the gas station. I stood by the counter, the faint smell of stale coffee mixing uneasily with the pungent scent of gasoline. It was past midnight, and the solitary hum of the refrigerator was the only sound competing with the distant rustle of leaves outside. I had taken refuge here after my car broke down on the way to my sister's, a 6-hour drive that had quickly turned into a nightmare. The attendant, an older man with a scruffy beard and a stained cap, simply called himself Sam. He had run the station for as long as anyone remembered, 20 years, he claimed, though I suspected it was much longer. His eyes held shadows of sleepless nights, and his skin bore the wrinkles of worry. He seemed both interested in my presence and indifferent to it, glancing up occasionally as he fiddled with a stack of outdated maps. "Need help?" he finally muttered, not really looking at me but more at the ceiling where a flickering light struggled against the darkness. I shook my head, tightening my grip on my phone. The screen was dark, no signal for hours. I had texted my sister earlier, hoping she'd know a solution. She hadn't replied. A creeping dread wormed its way into my thoughts. What if something had happened? I needed to get moving, but the car was unresponsive, and there was no mechanic in sight. "Don't worry too much about it," Sam said, watching me now with a mixture of pity and concern. "These things always manage to work themselves out. Just takes time." I forced a smile, but it felt brittle. I tried to distract myself by looking through the small convenience store section, filled with dusty snack racks and a cooler filled with sodas and bottled water. It felt surreal being here, trapped in this desolate outpost. I was acutely aware of the time slipping away, and the isolation began to gnaw at my nerves. As I wandered down an aisle, I heard the jingle of the door chime, announcing a new arrival. I turned to see a figure enter, tall and cloaked in darkness, the kind of silhouette that could make anyone feel uneasy. The man took slow, deliberate steps toward the counter, the light catching the edge of a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. I couldn't make out his features, but I could sense the weight of his presence. "Gas," he said, his voice gravelly, hinting at a long journey that perhaps shouldn't have been made. Sam nodded, clearly uncomfortable but accustomed to the strange clientele that passed through. I edged closer to the counter, the tension in the air thickening as the man cleared his throat. "Fill it up," he added, his gaze drifting around the station, settling on me for a fleeting moment. I felt the chill of his stare, a sharp contrast to the warm, stale air inside. "Sure thing," Sam replied, moving to the back without breaking eye contact with the newcomer. I returned to the shelves, half-heartedly browsing items I didn't need, my heart racing in my chest. Something about the man unnerved me, but I couldn't pinpoint exactly what it was. He moved slowly, like a predator surveying its surroundings. I tried to shake off the discomfort, focusing instead on my phone, hoping for a miracle. The door swung open again. A gust of cool air swept through the station as another figure entered. This one was a woman, disheveled and wide-eyed, her clothes muddy and torn. She stumbled in, her breathing quick and frantic. "Help!" she cried, voice trembling. "You have to help me. He's coming." The room froze. The woman's fear was palpable, and my heart raced as she turned, looking over her shoulder as if expecting something or someone to follow her inside. Sam moved cautiously toward her, hands raised in a placating gesture. "Slow down, ma'am," he said, his voice steady yet strained. "Who's coming?" "The man," she gasped, glancing at the man by the counter. He didn't seem fazed, though I felt an icy grip close around my spine. "He's out there. He's been following me." Her panic reached a boiling point, and suddenly, she turned and rushed toward the door, slamming it shut behind her. The jingle echoed painfully in the silence, and the woman pressed her back against the door, breath coming in short gasps. "Call the police." I shouted, but Sam merely stood frozen, staring at the man. The tension clawed in my throat as I realized we were all trapped in this small space with him. "Easy now," the man said, his voice low and smooth, as if he were trying to soothe a frightened animal. "I'm not here to hurt anyone." "Then what do you want?" I demanded, stepping forward, adrenaline coursing through my veins. If I was going to face this, I needed to know. He merely shrugged, adopting an air of nonchalance that only deepened my unease. "Just passing through." "But the lady, well, she's a bit mistaken." "Why should we believe you?" I shot back, my hands clenched into fists at my sides. The woman behind the door shivered, her eyes wide with terror. He's dangerous." A distant rumble of thunder echoed outside, and I glanced at the window. Dark clouds loomed, and the wind began to howl, rattling the glass. The atmosphere transformed. What had been a stale, musty gas station now felt like a claustrophobic trap. "Let's just calm down," Sam interjected, but the commotion seemed to embolden the man. He stepped closer, his demeanor shifting from casual to predatory, the shadows in the corners of the store deepening as if to envelop us. "Why don't we all just have a chat?" he suggested, his voice silky and dangerous. I felt the hairs on my neck rise, a primal instinct warning me to flee. But where could I go? The woman's hand trembled against the door, and I locked eyes with her. We were in this together, two strangers sharing an impending doom. I stepped toward her, ready to take action, but the man raised his hand, and the atmosphere thickened with a bone-deep dread. The little sanctuary of the gas station had become a cage, and as the storm raged outside, I knew that whatever lay beyond our fragile walls was not the only threat. The rain continued to hammer against the roof of the old gas station, a relentless drumming that drowned out every other sound. I had taken refuge inside the cramped store, its fluorescent lights flickering intermittently, casting odd shadows around me. The smell of stale chips mingled with something more metallic, a scent that lingered in the air and settled in the back of my throat. I had long since stopped wondering if it was the chips or something worse. The clerk had disappeared into the back of the store, leaving me alone with my jittery thoughts. I had wanted to leave, to step back into the downpour and escape this place, but the storm had intensified, sheets of rain obscuring everything beyond the Cape glass windows. The faint sound of thunder rumbled in the distance, echoing off the hills like an ominous warning. The thought of being caught out there made my skin crawl. I wandered the aisles, the soft squish of my sneakers against the wet floor sounding too loud in the silent store. My finger traced the edge of a shelf lined with dusty bottles of soda and half-eaten snacks that no one would ever buy. I caught my reflection in the glass of a drink cooler, a gaunt figure with wild eyes and damp hair that clung to my forehead. I barely recognized myself. A sudden clatter erupted from the back room, followed by a muffled shout. My heart raced, a wild drumbeat in my chest. I considered calling out, but something held me back, an instinct that whispered I should remain quiet. I stepped closer to the back door, the splintered wood barely visible in the dim light. My mind flashed to the stories I had heard over the years, tales of gas stations that weren't quite right, of strange occurrences that motivated travelers to keep their windows rolled up and their doors locked. I strained to listen. The rain roared as though the world was drowning with it the sounds from the back. After a moment, everything turned still. A cold shiver ran down my spine as the silence stretched on, taut and heavy, like a thread about to snap. "Hello?" I called, my voice shaky, almost drowned out by the wind howling outside. I waited, holding my breath. Nothing. I turned back toward the main store, my heart pounding in my ears. The bright lights flickered again, and I cursed under my breath. Maybe it was just a power surge, but something told me it was more than that. The air felt charged, electric, as if something was waiting to happen. I grabbed a bag of pretzels, a futile attempt to distract myself, and settled down by the register, my back to the wall. The clerk had left her radio on, a low hum of static intermittently interrupted by a few scattered news bulletins. I strained to catch anything that might provide solace, but it only added to my unease. Then I heard it. A soft shuffle from the back, followed by the creak of floorboards. I looked up, fidgeting with the bag in my hands. The sound was too deliberate, too cautious. My heart raced faster, a trapped bird in my chest. Adrenaline coursed through me, and I considered bolting for the door. Is everything okay back there? I ventured again, louder this time, trying to sound braver than I felt. No answer. I got up slowly, moving towards the back like someone tiptoeing through a minefield. The air felt thick, almost suffocating, and I had to force myself to breathe. I reached the door that led to the back room, an old wooden thing that looked like it hadn't been opened in years. I placed my hand on the doorknob, hesitating as an image flickered through my mind of someone lurking behind the door, waiting to pounce. Clenching my teeth, I turned the knob and pushed the door open. The room beyond was dark, lit only by the glow of a single bulb that swayed gently from the ceiling. Shadows danced along the walls, and I squinted, trying to make sense of the disarray. Boxes were strewn everywhere, some overturned, contents spilling out. But it was what I saw on the floor that made my stomach lurch. The clerk lay sprawled against the wall, his eyes wide and unseeing, a thin line of crimson tracing down his neck. A chill swept through me, followed by a wave of revulsion. I stepped back, my foot slipping on a puddle of something wet, and I barely caught myself. God! I gasped, my heart leaping into my throat. I turned to run, but the door slammed shut behind me, trapping me inside the dim room. Panic flooded my veins, and I pounded my fists against the door. Let me out! I shouted, my voice rising in pitch. I pressed my back against the door, my mind racing. Someone or something was in here with me. Then, a low chuckle echoed from the shadows, sending a wave of dread crawling up my spine. I froze, faced with an overwhelming urge to flee and a paralyzing terror that kept me rooted to the spot. The chuckle deepened into a rasping sound, and I felt the presence draw closer, a weight in the air. Looking for something, a voice called, slithering through the darkness. I swallowed hard, dread pooling in my stomach as I felt the fingertips of panic flutter inside my chest. My eyes darted around the room, searching for anything that could help me escape this nightmare. But all I could do was stare into the shadows, waiting for whatever was lurking within to reveal itself. The gas station loomed ahead like a specter in the night, its flickering fluorescent lights casting an eerie glow on the cracked pavement. I had driven for hours, the landscape blurring into monochrome shades of dark and despair. My stomach twisted in knots, not just from hunger but from the palpable dread that coursed through me as I pulled into the lot. The station stood alone amidst desolation, an oasis of light in a desert of shadows. I parked next to a rusted pickup that had seen better days, its owner presumably long gone. My headlights swept across the building's exterior, revealing peeling paint and a dusty sign advertising age-old snacks and fuel prices that seemed to belong in another era. The door creaked ominously as I entered, the sound echoing in the cavernous space. The air was thick, suffused with the smell of stale coffee and something else, something rotten that clawed at my senses. I stepped inside cautiously, glancing around. The convenience store was dimly lit, the flickering bulbs overhead adding to the unsettling atmosphere. A single clerk stood behind the counter, his expression blank and his gaze unfocused, as if he were trapped in a waking nightmare. "Evening," I said, forcing myself to break the tension. My voice sounded foreign in the oppressive silence. He didn't respond. Just continued to stare, the fluorescent lights reflecting off his unblinking eyes. A shiver ran down my spine. I tried to shake it off, moving past the aisle stocked with outdated snacks and drinks, their vibrant packaging faded and dust-coated. I needed to refuel, my tank was low, and my nerves were shot. The gas pumps outside looked as ancient as the building itself, rust and grime clinging to them like memories best forgotten. I grabbed a pack of beef jerky from a shelf, the last remnant of sustenance I could muster, and approached the counter again. "Just this," I said, placing the jerky on the counter. The clerk finally blinked but remained motionless, as if he were processing my words at a glacial pace. He rang me up, his fingers moving mechanically over the keys. I fished out a few crumpled bills from my pocket. As I handed over the money, I caught sight of a newspaper folded haphazardly next to the register. The headline screamed a chilling tale, "Missing woman's body found in the woods." My heart raced as I skimmed the details. Do you have any idea what happened?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. His eyes darted to the newspaper, then back to me, unblinking. "Just a tragedy. People go missing around here." A knot tightened in my stomach. "What do you mean, around here?" He shrugged, his indifference unsettling. "This town's cursed. Bad things happen in the dark." Unease settled over me like a heavy fog. I took my change and stepped back, heart pounding as I contemplated leaving. I had heard enough ghost stories to know that dark places often house dark things. I turned toward the door, ready to escape the oppressive atmosphere, but as I did, the bell above the entrance jingled. A figure stepped inside, silhouetted against the bright lights outside. My pulse quickened as I recognized him, the man who had been chasing me. The clerk seemed to sense the shift in the air, his expression morphing from apathetic to alarmed. I stood frozen, paralyzed by fear as the man's face split into a sinister smile. He strode towards me, every step calculated, predatory. "Thought you could run away from me?" His voice was smooth, but the underlying threat made my skin crawl. Panic surged through me as I glanced toward the clerk for help. But he merely stared, a spectator in a scene he had no intention of disrupting. I backed away instinctively, my mind racing. I had to get out. He took another step closer, and I turned to bolt toward the exit. My foot caught on something on the floor, a patch of sticky liquid, perhaps soda or something worse. I stumbled, nearly losing my balance. The man laughed. "Running is futile, you know." I regained my footing and hurled myself toward the door, flinging it open in a desperate bid for freedom. The cold night air hit me like a slap, but I didn't stop. I dashed toward my car, fumbling for my keys in a panic. "Hey!" The man's voice echoed behind me, low and menacing. "You can't leave yet." I felt the adrenaline pump through my veins, my breath coming in frantic gasps. At last, I found the keys and yanked them from my pocket. I jumped into the driver's seat, fumbling to insert the key into the ignition, my hands trembling uncontrollably. "Stop," he shouted, his voice a dark growl. I turned the key, praying for the engine to roar to life. It sputtered, refused, and my heart plummeted. I glanced in the rearview mirror, a mistake. The man was a mere few feet away, his grin wide, teeth glinting in the light. With a final desperate turn of the key, the engine roared to life. I slammed the gear into drive and hit the gas, tires screeching as I tore out of the parking lot, the gas station fading into darkness behind me. But even as the distance grew between us, I could feel his eyes on me, a lingering presence that whispered of danger yet to come. I had escaped, for now, but I knew I couldn't outrun the shadows that haunted this cursed road. Story 3, Echoes from the Forgotten Grave. The house stood at the end of Harrow Lane like a tombstone, weathered and solemn, its dark windows gazing down on the world with an air of judgment. I had known the place for years, lingering at its edge during childhood games, daring my friends to touch the gate that creaked like an old man's bones. but that was all innocent play. The day I returned, the air hung thick with secrets, and the weight of the past pressed down on my shoulders. I drove slowly, the gravel crunching beneath my tires as I pulled up to the front. The overgrown garden had reclaimed much of the yard, a tangled mess of thorny vines and weeds that clawed at my sneakers as I stepped out. My heart raced, not from fear but from a sense of obligation. My grandmother had left me the house when she passed, a relic I had never imagined inheriting. I had come to settle affairs, to sift through the remnants of her life, but I felt a strange pull, the kind that siphons away courage and leaves you exposed. As I pushed open the creaking door, the hinges screamed in protest, echoing through the empty hallway. Dust motes danced in the slivers of light that pierced the gloom, illuminating the worn floorboards beneath my feet. I took a deep breath, the sharp scent of old wood and forgotten memories filling my lungs. My grandmother had lived here alone for years, and it was hard to believe anyone had ever filled these rooms with laughter. Each step deeper into the house felt like a descent into something dark and treacherous. I moved cautiously, my fingers brushing against the walls, tracing the faded wallpaper that peeled like the skin of a long-forgotten ghost. The air was thick, almost electric, as if the house held its breath, waiting for something to awaken. I hadn't been inside for nearly a decade, yet it felt as if time had warped in here, stretching moments into eternity. I wandered into the living room, where the grand fireplace dominated the space, its hearth choked with ash. My grandmother had always been a superstitious woman, the kind who never kept a mirror facing the door or let the moonlight touch the bed. I chuckled to myself, remembering her warnings against the unseen forces that roamed the night, but laughter dried up when I glanced toward the window. The shadows seemed to flicker just beyond the glass, like figures moving in the corner of my vision. Shaking off the chill that crept down my spine, I moved to the kitchen. The cabinets stood ajar, their contents scattered in disarray, as if someone had ransacked the place. I frowned, running my fingers over the countertops, where layers of grime told tales of neglect. Then, an unsettling thought crossed my mind. Hadn't I locked the door behind me? I turned, half expecting to see someone lurking in the doorway, but the house was silent, its old bones creaking under the weight of solitude. I spent hours going through the house, collecting items that sparked memories, a photo album filled with faded images, her favorite tea set chipped at the edges, a collection of books carefully stacked on a rickety shelf. But as dusk settled in and shadows stretched across the walls, the sense of unease grew, gnawing at the edges of my mind. Sitting on the worn sofa, I thumbed through the photo album, tracing my grandmother's face in the images. Each snapshot told a story of a life well lived, yet a dark undercurrent throbbed beneath the surface, a sense of sorrow I couldn't quite place. As I turned the pages, a strange chill enveloped me, and I felt an inexplicable urge to look over my shoulder, as if someone were watching from the shadows. The house creaked, and the old wood groaned under the weight of its history. I set the album down, but the air seemed to shift, thickening with tension. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. Then, a whisper, barely audible, yet distinct, echoed through the room, sending shivers cascading down my spine. It was a voice, low and mournful, like a distant memory surfacing from the depths of a dream. "Help me." My breath caught in my throat. I stood abruptly, heart racing, scanning the dimly lit room for any sign of movement. Nothing. Just the oppressive silence that had settled in again. Perhaps I had imagined it, just a trick of the mind playing on my exhaustion. I forced myself to breathe, but the sensation of being watched still lingered, a palpable weight that pressed down on my chest. Determined to shake off the feeling, I exited the living room and climbed the narrow staircase, each step creaking ominously. The scent of dust and decay hung heavy in the air, but there was something else, something metallic. I paused outside the door to my grandmother's bedroom, a strange compulsion urging me to enter. The door swung open on rusted hinges, revealing a room frozen in time. The bed was neatly made, a quilt folded meticulously at the foot, but the air felt charged with a presence. I stepped inside, my eyes drawn to the small writing desk tucked into the corner, papers scattered haphazardly across its surface. As I approached, the metallic scent intensified, curling into my nostrils, and I felt a sudden rush of nausea. It was then that I saw it, a shadow flitting past the window, something dark and swift. My heart leapt into my throat, panic coursing through my veins as I rushed to the window, yanking back the curtains. Outside, the garden loomed still and dense, the only movement a rustle of leaves in the evening breeze. But deep down, I felt the weight of eyes upon me, lurking just beyond the edge of perception. I stumbled back, confusion spiraling into fear. It was just an old house, I reminded myself. Just memories and dust. Yet the whispers returned, insistent, echoing in my ears. I was now alone here, and as night settled in with its thick blanket of darkness, I feared that whatever haunted these walls was awakening. I didn't sleep that night, the weight of the darkness pressing against my eyelids while the haunting echoes of the old house pulsed in my ears. The creaky floorboards, the whisper of wind through cracked windows, and the strange rustling noise from the attic had become a symphony of discomfort that lulled me into a state of restless awareness. I kept glancing at the clock, each minute dragging out as if time itself were mocking me. Morning brought no relief. The pale light filtered through the grimy windows, illuminating shadows that seemed to stretch longer than they should. I took a deep breath, steeling myself. I had to confront whatever had stirred in this house. It was just a building, after all, wood, nails, and plaster. Yet it felt alive, as though it held the collective breath of the generations that had come before me. After a quick breakfast of stale cereal, I decided to venture into the attic, the source of so many of my anxious thoughts. I could almost hear the whispers calling me, taunting me. I climbed the rickety staircase, each step protesting under my weight. The attic door loomed above me, a heavy slab of wood that seemed to absorb the light around it. I hesitated for a moment, my hand hovering over the doorknob, sensing the thick air, as if the space behind the door could swallow me whole. With a determined exhale, I turned the knob and pushed the door open. The hinges groaned like a warning. Dust motes danced in the beam of light from a small window, but the air was cold, unnaturally so, sending a shiver down my spine. I stepped inside, the floorboards creaking beneath my feet as if protesting my presence. Boxes lay haphazardly everywhere, their contents long forgotten. Old clothes, cracked photographs, and children's toys crowded the edges, remnants of lives that once thrived within these walls. I moved cautiously, fending off an inexplicable urge to turn back. I scanned the room, searching for anything out of the ordinary. It was then that I noticed a trunk in the corner, its leather surface worn and cracked, bound with fraying rope. Curiosity pulled at me, overriding my instincts to retreat. I approached it, my heart racing, as though I were walking into the mouth of a wolf. My hands trembled as I unfastened the rope and lifted the lid. Inside, I found an assortment of faded clothes, but what caught my eye was a small, ornate box nestled among them. It felt wrong, somehow, as if it were out of place amidst the mundane. The box was intricately carved, depicting scenes I didn't recognize, figures entwined in a dance, their expressions frozen in anguish or ecstasy. I lifted it out, brushing off the dust, and ran my fingers over the cool surface. As I opened the box, a chill swept through the attic, and the air thickened, becoming heavy and electric. Inside lay a collection of small trinkets, an old locket, a cracked mirror, and what appeared to be a withered flower encased in glass. But it was the feeling that washed over me, a rush of energy that prickled my skin, which drew me deeper into the contents. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from behind me, making me jump. I spun around, heart pounding, but saw nothing. I glanced back at the box, though the trinkets seemed unchanged. Still, the sense of being watched tightened around me like a noose. I took a step back, but just as I did, the mirror caught the light, reflecting not my own pale face but a shadowy figure lurking just behind me. I whipped around, breath hitching in my throat, but the space behind me was empty. My pulse raced, and I felt the breath on the back of my neck, a cold whisper that sent a tremor down my spine. "You shouldn't have come here," it seemed to say, echoing softly in the silence. Panic surged through me. I had to leave. I slammed the trunk shut and stumbled backward, nearly tripping over a stack of boxes. I turned to flee down the staircase, but a force halted me, rooting me to the spot. An invisible weight pressed against my chest, constricting my breath. "Get out," a voice hissed, distorted and angry, wrapping around me like a thick fog. I couldn't tell if it was inside my head or a tangible entity. My heart raced as I fought against the grip, my instinct screaming for me to break free. I finally tore myself away, bolting for the door. The weight lifted just as I crossed the threshold, allowing me to gasp in air as I slammed the door shut behind me, leaning against it for support. I stood still for a moment, heart racing, as the silence of the hallway enveloped me. The shadows danced along the walls, taunting me. I wanted to dismiss it all as a figment of my imagination, a trick of the light, an echo of my mind. But the lingering chill on my skin and the frantic pounding in my chest told a different story. I stumbled into the kitchen, trying to compose myself, but the air felt thick with unseen eyes. I needed to escape, to leave this house behind, yet I felt tethered to it, drawn by an unseen force. I needed answers, and I realized I wouldn't find them by retreating. I had to confront the darkness head-on. As I reached for my phone to research the history of the house, I caught a glimpse of something darting past the window. I froze, heart racing once more. I turned slowly, dread pooling in the pit of my stomach, knowing that the worst was yet to come. The following days blurred into a haze of muted whispers and unshakable tension. I forced myself to go about my routine, yet the shadows in my house felt more alive than before. Each creak of the floorboards seemed to hold secrets, each flicker of light felt like a reminder of something watching. I could no longer ignore the chilling encounters, nor could I dismiss the feeling that my old house was harboring something dark. On the third night since the first encounter with the apparition, if I could even call it that, I lay in bed, the moonlight sifting through my curtains. I had tried to rationalize everything, but there was a gnawing fear that had settled deep within me. I had half a mind to call the previous owners and ask them about this place, but the thought of confronting them terrified me. What if they knew something I didn't? I shivered and pulled the blankets closer, trying to drown out the thoughts. Sleep didn't come easily. Instead, I found myself staring at the ceiling, tracing the cracks with my eyes. A sudden thud reverberated through the house, pulling me from my stupor. My heart quickened as I sat up, straining my ears for further sounds. I heard it again, a soft scuffle followed by a deliberate scrape, as if something was being dragged across the floorboards. With apprehension tightening my throat, I swung my legs over the side of the bed and stood. The coolness of the hardwood against my feet sent a shiver up my spine. I hesitated, torn between the instinct to flee and some primal curiosity that urged me to investigate. The noise had come from the living room. My heart pounded like a drum as I crept toward it. Each step felt like a betrayal of my instincts, but I pressed on, driven by an unyielding need for answers. I reached the doorway and peeked around the corner. The room lay in shadows, the dim light from the street lamp outside barely penetrating the darkness. My gaze swept across the space, landing on the old armchair that faced the fireplace. The chair was in perfect view, but it was empty. I frowned, remembering the stories I had heard about this house. People claimed it was haunted, that strange occurrences were a common happening here. But I had dismissed them as mere folklore, until now. I took a tentative step into the room, my heart thudding in my chest. And then I saw it. A silhouette stood in the corner, a figure wrapped in darkness, almost blending with the walls themselves. My breath caught in my throat as I froze, caught between the instinct to flee and an inexplicable urge to understand. The figure seemed to be watching me, its outline shifting and flickering, like a flame caught in a gust of wind. "Who are you?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. The figure didn't answer, but the air around it felt charged, heavy with a palpable energy that made the hair on my arms stand on end. I took a step back, the floor creaking beneath my weight. Suddenly, the figure lunged forward, dissolving into a cloud of darkness and then reforming just inches away from me. My instincts kicked in, and I stumbled back, falling onto the floor, my heart racing. The figure loomed above me, an indistinct shape shrouded in shadows, and I could feel the chill in the air intensify. "Leave," it spoke, its voice a whisper that echoed through the room like a mournful wind. "You do not belong here." Panic surged within me as I scrambled to my feet, my mind racing. I didn't know what I had stumbled into, but I felt the urgency of the moment pressing down on me. "What do you mean?" I gasped, my words breaking free in a hurried breath. "What do you want from me?" The figure remained silent, its dark form quivering as if caught in a storm. I could see it more clearly now, its edges were sharp, its features undefined. It held an air of sorrow, and a fragment of guilt coursed through me. Perhaps it wanted to share something, to warn me of impending danger, but the fear overwhelmed my curiosity. "Please," I said, desperate for understanding. "Just tell me what I need to know." In response, the figure drifted closer, and for a fleeting moment, I thought I saw a glimmer of light in its depths. Then it spoke again, its words a mere murmur that rattled the walls around us. "The past lingers here. It traps the living." The air thickened, and I felt an inexplicable sense of dread wash over me. I had come searching for peace, yet here I was, standing before a spectral remnant of something I couldn't understand. "What happened here?" I whispered, my body trembling. The figure pointed a spectral finger toward the old portrait hanging on the wall, a faded image of the house and its previous occupants. "They took more than they gave. The price of their secrets is the weight of their sorrow." I turned to the portrait, feeling a sudden chill of recognition. The faces seemed hauntingly familiar, and a memory flickered in my mind, something I had read about the original owners, a tragedy that had struck them. But the details eluded me now, just out of reach. "Please," I begged, turning back to the specter, "I need to know what to do." The figure hesitated, the shadows swirling around it like smoke. Then it drifted back, merging into the darkness of the room until it was just a whisper in the air. "Unravel the threads," it murmured, "before they pull you under." As the figure faded into nothingness, I stood alone in the dim light, the weight of its message heavy upon me. I was no longer just a tenant but a reluctant participant in a story that had unfolded long before I arrived. The weight of their sorrow pressed down on me, and I realized I had no choice but to uncover the truth, whatever it may cost. The night descended upon me like a suffocating blanket, every shadow stretching and creeping along the walls of the old farmhouse. I hadn't spent a night there since I returned from the city, and the weight of the darkness pressed heavily against my chest, reminding me of all that had happened since my arrival. Earlier that day, I'd ventured into town, hoping to find answers about the strange occurrences surrounding my family's old home. The locals eyed me with a mix of pity and fear, their whispers swirling like the fog that clung to the edges of the streets. I caught snippets of conversations filled with words like haunted, cursed, and not safe. They didn't need to say more, the looks in their eyes told me everything. As I drove back, the sun dipped below the horizon, casting eerie shadows on the winding road. By the time I parked outside the house, an unsettling chill had settled in the air. I hesitated before stepping inside, grappling with the urge to flee. The door creaked as I pushed it open, a sound that echoed through the empty hallways like a ghostly welcome. I climbed the stairs to the second floor, memories of laughter and warmth swirling in my head, quickly overshadowed by the oppressive silence that had taken root. I reached my father's study, the room I had avoided since discovering what lay within its confines. The air grew thick with an unseen presence, and I could almost hear the whispers that had plagued my nights. I took a deep breath and stepped inside, the scent of dust and old paper wrapping around me like a shroud. My father's desk sat in the center, papers strewn across it, all yellowed with age. Among the clutter, a leather-bound journal caught my eye. It had been the only thing I hadn't dared to touch before. My pulse quickened as I picked it up, the weight of it heavy in my hands. Page after page revealed my father's frantic writings, notes about dreams that morphed into nightmares and strange happenings around the house. He had jotted down names, dates, and occurrences that seemed to escalate over time. One entry sent a shiver down my spine. They're watching. I can feel them. If I disappear, it's because they took me. I slammed the journal shut, my heart racing. Was this the legacy my father left behind? A warning turned to madness? Behind me, a rustle made my skin crawl. I turned, half expecting to see something lurking in the shadows, but the room remained empty, save for the dust motes dancing in the fading light. Yet, an unsettling feeling hung in the air, as if something was just out of sight, watching. Determined to regain my composure, I left the study, but the house felt different now. The walls seemed to pulse, and the floor creaked beneath my weight, every echo amplified by the dark. I reached the living room and flicked on the lamp, the light flickering, casting long, wavering shadows across the walls. I sank onto the couch, trying to shake off the oppressive feeling closing in around me. That night, sleep evaded me. I stared at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the owls, distant creaks, the whispers of the wind outside. The clock ticked steadily, a reminder that time was moving forward while I felt trapped in this oppressive past. Just as I began to drift off, a figure flickered in the corner of my eye. I bolted up, heart racing, scanning the room. Nothing. I let out a shaky breath, scolding myself for succumbing to paranoia. Yet, just as I relaxed, the whisper returned, soft, almost melodic, weaving around the edges of my consciousness. I leaned closer as it grew louder, the words barely discernible, but the tone was unmistakably sinister. Leave, before it's too late. I shot up from the couch, terror coursing through my veins. The voice echoed in my mind, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it had come from the hallway. Against every instinct urging me to run, I stepped toward the sound. The hallway stretched before me, dark and foreboding. I hesitated, but the whisper returned, beckoning me forward. With hesitant steps, I approached the staircase leading to the attic. The boards creaked underfoot, and I felt an uncanny chill creeping up my spine as I reached the top. The attic door stood ajar, an invitation or a trap. I pushed it open, the hinges groaning in protest. The attic was filled with cobwebs and dust, the air stale and suffocating. Moonlight streamed through a small window, illuminating boxes piled high in the corners. I scanned the space, searching for any sign of the presence that had called to me. As I moved deeper into the room, the whispers grew frantic, swirling around me, a cacophony of warnings and pleas. Suddenly, a box toppled over, sending its contents spilling onto the floor. I stumbled back, heart racing, and as I knelt to pick up a few old photographs, my breath caught in my throat. The images were of my family, smiling faces, framed happiness. But in the background of one picture, something shifted. A figure, barely visible, stood obscured by shadows, watching. I dropped the photo, the sound shattering the heavy silence. I knew I was not alone. The air thickened, and a cold breeze washed over me, extinguishing the warmth of my hope. I backed away slowly, every instinct screaming at me to flee. As I turned to escape, the door slammed shut with a deafening bang, trapping me within the attic's suffocating embrace. The whispers crescendoed into a wail, and in that moment, I felt an overwhelming force close in around me. The darkness wrapped around my body, and I gasped, adrenaline surging as I pounded against the door. I had come in search of answers, but I had unearthed something far more malevolent. In my desperation, I finally managed to shove the door open and stumble back into the hallway. I raced down the stairs, the shadows darting and swirling in my peripheral vision, the whispers trailing behind me like a sinister echo. I didn't look back until I reached the front door, my heart pounding with terror and disbelief. As I burst outside, the chill of the night air washed over me, grounding me in reality. But I couldn't shake the feeling that the owls had awakened something dark and ancient. I had entered a nightmare, and somehow, I knew it was just the beginning. The first light of dawn barely reached the peeling wallpaper of the master bedroom, but I could already feel the weight of the night pressing against my chest. I had fallen into a fitful sleep, but it came with the nagging awareness that something was watching me. I jolted awake, the remnants of a dream clinging to my mind like cobwebs, but I could never remember the details, only the gnawing sensation of dread that accompanied it. Yesterday had drained me. I had spent hours going through the attic, cataloging the strange objects that seemed to have an unshakable hold on the house. Though most of the items were mundane, a stack of dusty children's books, a few rusted tools, there were others that felt as though they had been steeped in shadows. A cracked porcelain doll with a face that appeared too knowing, and a weathered mirror that reflected the world in distorted hues. I had left them in a pile, deciding that today, I would rid the house of its burdens. As I lay there, the pale morning light crept shyly into the room, illuminating the corners where the darkness had lingered too long. I swung my legs over the side of the bed, the coolness of the wooden floor sending a jolt of awareness through me. The house was quiet, too quiet, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was present. I made my way to the attic again, the old floorboards creaking beneath my weight, a disconcerting reminder of all the lives that had walked this space before me. Each step echoed like a heartbeat, loud and frantic, as I reached the top of the stairs. For a moment, I hesitated, the air heavy with an unspoken tension, but I pushed past it, determined to confront whatever supernatural forces lingered in that darkened room. The attic was dimly lit, the single window revealing just enough light to expose the clutter I had left behind. I focused on the mirror first, drawn to it in a way I couldn't explain. I edged closer, feeling the cold pull of its surface. I remembered how it had warped my reflection, the way it had seemed to swallow my image, and I wondered if I had conjured that feeling out of fear or if it had been real. With shaky hands, I reached out to touch the frame, but before my fingers made contact, a shiver coursed through me. I caught a glimpse of movement out of the corner of my eye. I turned my head sharply, expecting to see a trick of the light, but the attic was still. The stillness was palpable, thickening the air. I returned my gaze to the mirror. It was as if I was drawn into its depths, the surface shimmering unnaturally. I stepped closer, compelled to peer deeper. My forehead almost touched the glass, the coolness of it sending a chill through me. And then, I saw her. A figure stood behind me, a woman cloaked in shadow, her features indistinct yet hauntingly familiar. Panic surged through me as I turned on my heel, but the attic was empty, only the dust motes drifting lazily in the light. It took all I had to breathe, grounding myself against the wooden frame of the window. "Get a grip," I muttered under my breath, but even I could hear the tremor in my voice. I steeled myself and turned back to the mirror, my heart racing. The reflection revealed nothing but the empty attic, but I sensed that presence still lingering. I wanted to scream, to demand answers from the void, but I was paralyzed by an unspeakable fear. Instead, I took a step back, breathing heavily as I wrestled with the urge to flee. In the corner of the attic, the porcelain doll caught my eye again. It seemed to stare at me, its painted mouth twisted in a grotesque semblance of a smile. I approached, kneeling to inspect it more closely. A thought flickered at the back of my mind, wasn't this the doll that had been missing when I found it? I reached out to touch its porcelain cheek, and as my fingers brushed the cool surface, a chill ran through me. A voice echoed in the silence, a whisper barely above the sound of my breath, "Help me." I jerked back, the panic consuming me. "Who?" I shouted, my voice breaking the stillness. The air thickened, the temperature in the attic dropping sharply. I felt the weight of the unseen presence pressing in on me, and in that moment, a realization struck like lightning: I was not alone. The atmosphere crackled with energy as I stood frozen, caught between fight and flight. "Show yourself!" I yelled into the gloom, seizing the defiance that had once fueled my resolve. Suddenly, the doll's head tilted slightly to the side as if it were considering my challenge. I stumbled back, the weight of all my fears crashing down on me. The air around me shimmered, and for a split second, I saw her again, the woman from the mirror, her features becoming clearer, her mouth forming silent words. "Help me." The attic felt like a cage, and I could hear the pounding of my heart echoing in my ears. Something stirred in the shadows, and I felt the urge to flee, yet curiosity held me in place. I had come here to confront the darkness, to find the source of the terror that haunted this house. And now, it was asking for my help. With a trembling hand, I reached toward the doll again, drawn into the storm of uncertainty. But before I could touch it, a chilling breeze swept through the attic, extinguishing the light and plunging me into darkness. I gasped, my breath hitching in my throat as a deep, resonant voice filled the space around me, echoing through the ages. "Do you dare to tread where others have fallen?" The words hung in the air like a warning as I stood on the precipice of a choice: will I stand my ground or succumb to the fear that threatened to engulf me? The decision weighed heavily, and in that moment, my fate hung in the balance. Story 4: Echoes in the Dark Forest. The forest loomed larger than I remembered, its trees twisted and gnarled like the fingers of some monstrous hand reaching for the sky. Each step I took felt heavier than the last, the damp earth sucking at my boots. It had been nearly a week since Sarah went missing, and every hour spent searching for her chipped away another piece of my sanity. I could still hear her laughter echoing in my mind, mingled with a sense of urgency that drove me deeper into the thicket. I had grown up in these woods. The towering pines and the rustle of leaves were my childhood playground. Yet, now, the very same trails that once felt like home twisted with an ominous air. It was the kind of silence that stifled your breath, the kind that made your skin prickle with apprehension. I was not alone out here, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something watched me from the shadows. My phone buzzed, pulling me from my thoughts. It was a message from the search team leader, asking for an update. I swallowed hard and typed back that I hadn't found anything. The signal wavered as I pressed send, a reminder that I was far from civilization. As I slipped the phone back into my pocket, I heard it, a faint whisper carried by the wind, a voice that made my heart race. I spun around, scanning the trees for any sign of movement, but there was nothing. Just the wind, mocking me with its chilling caress. The search had started with hope. Sarah hadn't been an avid hiker, but she decided to take a solo trek to clear her head. I remembered our last conversation, her laughter spilling over the phone as she told me about her plans. I had dismissed her concerns about the weather, thinking she was being dramatic. How naive I had been. Now, every rustle in the underbrush felt like a reminder of my failure to protect her. I pressed on, the path narrowing as I ventured deeper into the woods. The trees closed in around me, and the air grew thick with dampness and decay. I could almost feel the weight of the world leaning in, suffocating me. I stumbled upon a clearing, the kind where sunlight pierced the canopy and bathed the ground in golden light. For a brief moment, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe she had made it this far. Maybe I would find her here. But the hope fizzled, replaced by unease. I approached the center of the clearing, scanning the ground for any sign that she had passed through. That's when I noticed the ground was disturbed, a circle of churned earth and twisted roots. My pulse quickened as I knelt down, brushing away the leaves. There were footprints, small and delicate, leading deeper into the woods. They were fresh. My heart sank. I followed the prints, each step driven by a mix of desperation and dread. The tightness in my chest grew with every footfall, and soon I stumbled upon a small brook, its water sparkling but uninviting. I crouched beside it, cupping my hands in the cool water. As I splashed my face, I caught a glimpse of something movement in the trees. I turned, heart pounding, but there was only stillness, a heavy silence that slammed against my ears. I continued on, the path narrowing and becoming more treacherous. The trees leaned in closer, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. Shadows lengthened, and I swore I could hear something breathing, keeping pace with me. I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting to see a silhouette behind me, but found nothing. Just the relentless whisper of the wind, swirling around me, taunting me with its secrets. The sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows that danced menacingly at the edges of my vision. Panic began to claw at my throat. I should turn back. I should call for help. But that thought was drowned out by the desperate need to find her. The footprints were getting harder to follow, disappearing into underbrush before reappearing again as if taunting me. Eventually, I reached a point where the trees grew sparse, revealing an old, overgrown path that looked as if it hadn't been used in years. A chill swept over me. A sense of foreboding gnawed at my gut, but I felt drawn to it. The footprints beckoned, and I could almost hear Sarah's voice again, calling me to follow. Ignoring the shivers racing down my spine, I stepped onto the path. As I walked, the air grew colder. The trees seemed to crowd in tighter, almost suffocating in their embrace. I stopped when I heard it again, a soft, indistinguishable sound, like a child's giggle, laced with something darker. I turned, searching the shadows with my heart hammering in my chest. "Sarah," I called, the desperation surging through me like a tidal wave. "Sarah, can you hear me?" Silence answered, and the woods swallowed my voice, leaving only the echo of my own fear. My breath quickened, a panic rhythm pounding in my ears. I pressed forward, each step heavier than the last, the weight of doubt dragging me down. Just as I was about to lose hope, I saw a flash of color ahead, a piece of bright fabric caught on a branch. I rushed toward it, my heart leaping with a mix of dread and hope. But when I reached the spot, my heart plummeted. The fabric was a scrap from a child's shirt, torn and stained with darkened patches. I knelt down, a cold dread curling around my spine. The footprints I had followed were gone, leaving only the remnants of laughter echoing in the back of my mind. I was alone in the darkening woods, the heartbeat of the forest a steady reminder that some things were not meant to be unearthed. The air was still heavy with the scent of wet earth and pine. I inhaled deeply, trying to steady my nerves. The forest had transformed since I last traversed its trails. Shadows danced ominously between the trees, and a sense of foreboding crept into my thoughts. I was no longer in the comforting embrace of nature, but rather lost in its dark underbelly, a place where the known slipped away, and the unknown awaited like a predator. As I moved deeper into the woods, I replayed the events leading up to this moment. It had started innocuously enough, a routine search and rescue mission for a missing hiker named Clara, a young woman who had been reported missing 3 days prior. She had ventured into these very woods, armed with nothing more than a small backpack and her adventurous spirit. But as the hours turned into days, the hope of finding her alive dwindled, and a chilling realization settled in: something was terribly wrong. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows that seemed to writhe with life. I gripped my flashlight tightly, the beam cutting through the murky darkness, illuminating patches of underbrush that rustled as if something unseen lurked within. Each snap of a twig sent my heart racing, and the rhythmic beating echoed in my ears like a warning drum. I had been assigned to a small team of seasoned rescuers, yet even their bravado wavered as we discussed the emerging theories about Clara's disappearance. Some said she had gotten lost, others whispered about a curse that plagued these woods, an old wives' tale that spoke of those who ventured too deep, never to return. I dismissed it at first, But the further I roamed, the more it gnawed at me, casting doubt on my resolve. I heard something, a sound that vibrated through the trees, a low, mournful moan. It sent a shiver up my spine. I froze, listening intently. It was unmistakable, a voice, though distorted by the distance and the thick air. I couldn't tell if it was a plea for help or a warning. My instinct screamed at me to stay put, to call on my team, but curiosity overwhelmed my hesitation. I pressed forward, every step heavier than the last. My flashlight flickered, the beam wavering as if struggling against an unseen force. I cursed under my breath, hitting the side of the device to coax it back to life. The feeble glow reasserted itself, but I could feel the darkness pushing in around me, thick and suffocating. I fought the encroaching dread, reminding myself of Clara, lost and alone, possibly in pain. I had to find her. After what felt like an eternity, I stumbled upon a clearing, the trees parting like curtains to reveal a small, eerie expanse. The ground was littered with broken branches and dried leaves, but it was the sight in the center that froze me in my tracks, a small, makeshift campsite. My heart sank. Clara's campsite. The familiar outline of a worn-out tent, a backpack tossed carelessly to the side. It smelled of abandonment, of fear. I approached cautiously, scanning the area for any sign of life. The tent flaps fluttered gently in the breeze, inviting me closer. "Clara?" I called out, my voice trembling. No response. I hesitated, my mind racing with every possible scenario. What if she had met with something sinister? What if she had been hurt, unable to call out? Without thinking, I stepped closer, peering into the darkness of the tent. The interior was a mess: empty water bottles, a half-eaten granola bar, and a journal lying open on the ground. I knelt down, tracing my fingers over the pages. The last entry sent a chill down my spine. It was frantic, filled with erratic scribbles and drawings, sketches of grotesque faces, shadows with gaping mouths. "I'm being followed," it read in jagged letters. "I hear them whispering at night. They want me to go deeper." A cold sweat broke out on my brow. I stood abruptly, the journal slipping from my grasp and hitting the ground with a soft thud. I backed away, my instinct screaming at me to leave, but as I turned to flee, I heard it again, a whisper, insistent, close. "Help me, please." It was a voice, unmistakably human yet distorted with despair. I couldn't leave her. My heart raced as I glanced back at the tent. I had to find Clara. I followed the sound, pushing through the underbrush, my flashlight illuminating the path ahead like a lifeline. The whispers grew louder, echoing up the trees, shifting in tone, a chorus of longing and pain. "Help me, help me." I stumbled forward, guided by the voice, each step a battle against the growing dread wrapping around me. Suddenly, I broke through the trees and into another clearing, and there she was, Clara, huddled against a large boulder, her clothes torn, eyes wide with terror. Relief surged through me, but it was short-lived as I noticed the shadows flitting at the edges of my vision. "Clara!" I shouted, rushing toward her. Her gaze was blank, lost, as if she were trapped between this world and another. "I'm here. We're going to get you out of here." But as I reached her, I felt it, a chilling breeze that sent a wave of dread down my spine. The whispers crescendoed, and I turned to see figures emerging from the shadows, their forms indistinct and shifting, almost as if they were made of the very darkness surrounding us. I was no longer sure who needed rescuing. "Run!" I shouted, grabbing Clara's arm, but she didn't respond. Her eyes remained fixed on something behind me, something that made me dread turning around. The whispers grew louder, an overwhelming cacophony that filled my mind, drowning out all rational thought. And in that moment, as I pulled her to her feet, I realized that in the heart of the woods, I wasn't just searching for Clara, I was searching for my own salvation against a darkness that wanted to consume us both. The sun had barely risen, casting a sickly gray light over the landscape, when I finally returned to the search site, a hollow feeling sitting heavy in my stomach. The forest loomed around me, twisted trees reaching out like bony fingers, and the air was thick with the scent of decaying leaves. Every crack of a twig, every rustle of a small creature in the underbrush sent shudders down my spine, as if the forest itself was alive and aware of my presence. I had joined the search and rescue team a month ago, drawn by the thrill of adventure and the desire to help others. But now, as I made my way toward the designated area, I questioned my motives. The last 2 days had been a whirlwind of frantic searching and growing despair. We were looking for Hannah, a college student who had disappeared while hiking. The longer she remained missing, the more the air felt charged with an unshakable dread. With each step I took down the rough trail, memories of Hannah flooded my mind. She had been the poster girl for vitality. A smile that could light up a room, a laugh that echoed like the sweetest melody. I had sat next to her in class countless times, sharing notes and exchanging jokes. To think she was out there, lost, alone, sent a chill racing through me. The sun barely pierced the canopy of leaves above, and the deeper I ventured into the woods, the more claustrophobic it felt. I scanned the area with a growing unease, aware that our search was nearing its 72-hour limit. We had covered a lot of ground, but there was still no sign, no indication of where Hannah might be. As I reached the clearing where we had set up our base the previous day, I noticed the other volunteers had already begun gathering. Their faces were drawn, haunted by the weight of uncertainty. Nobody spoke, but the palpable tension in the air screamed louder than any words. I joined them, searching for a sense of purpose that had begun to fade. "Any news?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer. "Nothing," Jake, the team leader, replied, running a hand through his unkempt hair. "We're going to widen the search radius. We have to check the riverbank again, and the old quarry." I nodded, though a gnawing feeling twisted in my gut. The river cut through these woods like a silver serpent, and I had heard stories about the quarry, a deep pit of dark water that held secrets, whispered to be haunted by those who had drowned long ago. I had no choice but to follow the others. We were committed to finding Hannah, no matter the cost. As we dispersed into the forest, I felt the oppressive silence close around me again. The further I traveled, the more I sensed a growing unease lurking just beyond the reach of my perception. The trees seemed to shift positions, shadows playing tricks on my mind. I tried to shake it off, telling myself I was just tired, that the long hours and worry were getting to me. After what felt like hours of fruitless searching, I was drawn toward a thicket that appeared denser than the surrounding foliage. Something compelled me to push through the underbrush, and I found myself in a small clearing. The ground was littered with broken branches and the remnants of a recent storm. In the center, I noticed something glinting slightly through the dirt, half buried under a layer of leaves. I knelt down, brushing away the debris, and my heart dropped as I unearthed a crumpled, muddy backpack, the unmistakable pattern of Hannah's. A surge of panic coursed through me, and I quickly unzipped it. Inside, I found a water bottle, a few granola bars, and a small notebook. My hands trembled as I opened the notebook, and my heart sank further when I read the last entries, hastily scrawled words that hinted at a growing fear. Hannah had been afraid. Afraid of being lost. Afraid of the dark. My stomach churned with dread, and I fought to keep my breathing steady. The forest suddenly felt more sinister, the shadows lengthening around me as if they were alive, whispering secrets I wasn't meant to hear. "Hey," a voice called from behind me, snapping me back to reality. It was Jake, looking frantic. "We found something." I turned, my heart racing. The backpack. I found it. His eyes widened as he stepped closer, and I could see the tension ripple through him. "This might change everything," he muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. We need to call everyone back. We gathered the others, urgency flooding the air as I showed them what I had found. Jake took charge, directing them to spread out in search of clues, while I stood in shock, the implications of the backpack weighing heavily on me. Hannah had been here. She had been so close, yet so far. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows on the forest floor, I felt an unease settle over us all. The woods felt heavier, darker. My instinct screamed to leave, but I couldn't abandon the search. I found myself drifting away from the group, enticed by a faint sound, a soft, sorrowful cry that seemed to echo through the trees. Help! Please help me! The voice sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. It sounded like Hannah. I sprinted toward the sound, branches whipping in my arms, heart thudding loudly in my ears. But the further I went, the more the cries morphed into an eerie, mocking echo. I stumbled into a clearing, breathless, but what I found made my blood run cold. There, in the shadows, were remnants of a fire, scorched earth and charred wood. A few feet away, I noticed something that made me freeze, an old, rusted shovel, half buried in the dirt. My mind raced with horrifying possibilities, but I didn't want to believe them. I turned to retrace my steps, but the forest had changed. The path I had taken was no longer there, swallowed by the trees. The realization settled in a rising dread that I was not alone, that something watched from the shadows. I took a step back, heart racing, as I felt the oppressive weight of the darkness closing around me. I was trapped in a nightmare of fear and uncertainty. As the sound of Hannah's cries faded into the silence of the woods, panic flooded my veins. I knew then that I was in the midst of something far more sinister than I had ever imagined. The air was heavy with moisture, the kind that clung to my skin like a shroud as the search team regrouped at the base of the looming cliffs at dawn. Tired faces lit by weak, sallow sunlight cast worried glances at one another. I could feel the weight of our collective fear. The forest had swallowed yet another soul, leaving nothing but a whisper of despair behind. As we gathered our equipment, the memories of last night twisted in my mind. The dim glow of our flashlights had barely pierced the suffocating darkness. How many times had we called out for Sarah, her name echoing through the trees as if each syllable was swallowed whole by the earth itself. My heart ached with the reality that we may never hear her voice again. The team leader, Jake, a man with an unyielding gaze and a commanding presence, stood before us. He had a way of making us feel less like lost souls and more like warriors. But today, even his bravado seemed to flicker. "We're going to split into two groups," he announced, his voice steady but quiet, as if afraid of disturbing the ominous silence that surrounded us. "I'll lead one towards the river. The other group head toward the ridge. If we find anything, we'll signal each other. Remember, stay vigilant." I nodded, swallowing my anxiety. The ridge was a treacherous path, full of overgrown roots and steep precipices. But Sarah had always been drawn to the edge of danger. She loved the thrill of the fall, the adrenaline rush that came with climbing. The thought of her out there alone, vulnerable, gnawed at me. I knew I had to be part of the team searching the ridge, where she would likely be. With my heart thundering in my chest, I joined a small group led by Amanda, a fellow volunteer whose determination I admired. As we treaded through the dense underbrush, I tried to keep my thoughts focused. Every rustle of leaves, every distant snap of a branch sent chills down my spine. Each sound morphed into whispers of dread. The ridge loomed closer, each step becoming more laborious as the terrain steepened. I could see Amanda ahead, pushing through the thick foliage. She turned back to check on me, her expression a mix of hope and fear. "We'll find her," she said, though the tremor in her voice betrayed her certainty. I forced a smile, but the truth sat like lead in my stomach. An hour passed as we climbed higher, the air growing thin and crisp. As we reached a clearing, I took a moment to catch my breath, scanning the surrounding woods. The trees stood like silent sentinels, their branches twisted into grotesque shapes that seemed to reach for something lost. I felt an unsettling sensation, as if they were watching us, holding secrets within their knotted bark. "Let's keep moving," Amanda urged, breaking the spell of silence that had settled over us. I nodded and followed her deeper into the woods, my eyes darting to every shadow. The sun had begun to disappear behind a blanket of clouds, casting a pallor over the landscape. We pushed forward, occasionally calling Sarah's name, our voices swallowed by the expanse of the forest. Each unanswered call felt like a nail driven deeper into my chest. My mind began to drift, consumed by thoughts of what could have happened to her. Had she fallen? Was she trapped? The scenarios twisted in my mind, each more terrifying than the last. Suddenly, Amanda stopped, her expression shifting. "Did you hear that?" she whispered, her voice barely above a breath. I strained my ears, heart pounding, and caught a faint sound, a distant echo that could have been a human cry or simply the wind playing tricks on me. "I think it came from over there." I pointed towards a dense thicket. Without waiting for a signal, I began to move, compelled by an instinct I couldn't name. It took all my willpower not to call out for Sarah again. As I reached the thicket, I hesitated. A creeping unease settled over me, like a cold hand wrapping around my throat. "Wait," Amanda said, grabbing my arm. "We should go back." I shook her off. "No. We can't turn back now. If that's her." Before I could finish, an ear-piercing scream pierced the air, a sound that froze my blood. It was unmistakably human and laced with terror. I whipped around, my heart racing, but Amanda was already sprinting toward the sound. "Come on," she shouted, her voice thick with panic. The two of us charged through the underbrush, fear propelling us forward until we broke into a small clearing. There, a grotesque sight awaited us. At the foot of a tree lay an old, tattered backpack, its straps frayed, caked with mud. That alone sent a jolt of hope through me, but as I stepped closer, I caught sight of something else. A mangled shoe, one I recognized as Sarah's. Its sole was smeared with something dark, something that could have been blood. My stomach turned, and I staggered back, nausea washing over me. "Sarah!" I cried, my voice cracking. Behind me, Amanda gasped. Her face had turned pale, the realization hitting us both like a punch to the gut. "Where is she?" Amanda whispered, her eyes darting around the clearing, searching for signs of movement. "What happened?" A rustling came from further into the woods, a low, guttural sound, unlike anything I had ever heard. It sent a shiver spiraling down my spine. I glanced at Amanda, who looked just as terrified as I felt. "Do we go back?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I was frozen, caught between the desperate need to find Sarah and the instinct to flee from whatever lurked in the shadows. But there was no choice. We couldn't leave without knowing what had happened. "Let's check it out," I said, pushing down the rising dread. "We can't leave her." As we crept deeper into the woods, the air grew thick with an indescribable tension. Each step felt like a challenge against the oppressive darkness that surrounded us. I could feel the weight of something watching, waiting. And then I heard it again, a chilling laugh echoing through the hollow trees, a sound that sent us both stumbling backward. Whatever lay ahead was not just the forest, but something far more sinister. "Run," I whispered, the word barely escaping my throat. But as I turned to flee, I knew we were not alone. The cold seeped into my bones as I trudged deeper into the woods, each step weighed down not just by the frosty ground, but by the mounting dread that gnawed at my mind. The sun had set hours ago, the darkness swallowing the last remnants of light, forcing me to rely on the feeble beam of my flashlight. As I searched, I couldn't shake the feeling that the forest around me was watching, waiting for me to make a mistake. A week had passed since we had embarked on this search and rescue mission for Jenna, the girl from the nearby town who had vanished during a hike with her friends. They claimed she had wandered off, possibly to explore a secluded stream, but only silence had returned. I had volunteered to join the searchers despite the reservations of my friends. Alone in the woods, the thought of her terror played on repeat in my mind. The more we combed through the underbrush, the more I felt the tightening grip of despair. I rounded a bend, the thin beam of my flashlight catching on damp leaves and gnarled tree roots. That was when I heard it, the faintest whisper, a rustle that didn't belong to the wind. My heart raced, and I held my breath, straining to listen. For a moment, I convinced myself it was just my imagination, but then the sound came again, low and almost melodic, like a child's giggle twisted into something sinister. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling in the stillness. The echo of my own question bounced back, mocking me in the quiet night. No reply came, only the rustling grew louder, a deliberate shuffling just outside my line of sight. I took a cautious step forward, shining my light toward where the sound originated. The beam flickered across the trees, illuminating the jagged silhouette of a large pine. As I stepped closer, the whispering faded to silence, and I felt an unsettling chill brush against my neck. It was as if the forest had collectively held its breath, waiting for me to move again. My instinct screamed at me to turn back, but I clenched my fists and pressed on, calling Jenna's name into the void. "Jenna, if you can hear me, please answer. We're looking for you." Each shout felt more desperate than the last, and I wondered if she had even made it this far. Did she even know we were searching? Ahead, the ground sloped downward, and as I descended, my beam of light fell upon something white nestled among the underbrush. My heart lurched. It was a piece of cloth, pale and tattered. I knelt to examine it, recognizing it at once her jacket, the one she had worn the day she disappeared. A chill crept through me. How had it come to be here? My breath caught in my throat as I stood, fear gnawing at my insides like a ravenous beast. I glanced around, the shadows stretching and contorting in the beams of my flashlight, revealing nothing but the oppressive darkness beyond. I was alone. A crunching sound erupted behind me, and I spun around, the light flickering wildly. My heart thundered as I fought the urge to run. "Who's there?" I shouted, trying to sound braver than I felt. The voice of calm and authority I had practiced in front of the mirror was but a whisper now, lost in the oppressive silence that followed. Just as I turned to investigate, the beam of light illuminated something, a figure standing between the trees, half hidden but undeniably there. I could make out the outline of a woman, hair draping over her shoulders like a shroud, her face obscured by shadow. My heart raced at the sight. Was it Jenna? Had she finally come back? "Jenna?" I called, my voice cracking. The figure didn't move. "Is that you? Can you hear me?" Then she stepped forward, ever so slowly. I could see her face now, pale and gaunt, eyes wide and unblinking, filled with something that made the hairs on my neck stand on end. It was as if she was staring right through me. I took a cautious step back, instinctively clutching the flashlight tighter. "Help me," she whispered, her voice so faint it was almost lost in the rustling branches overhead. "I can't find them." "Find who?" I asked, though I already sensed the answer. My pulse quickened, the darkness around me seeming to close in tighter, weighted with an unseen threat. She didn't answer, her mouth moving silently as her eyes bored deeper into mine, conveying an urgent desperation that made my skin crawl. Something was wrong. This was not the Jenna I had known. Her spirit seemed fractured, and a sense of foreboding twisted in my gut. Suddenly, she turned abruptly, glancing over her shoulder as though sensing something I could not. "Please," she hissed, before sprinting into the dark trees, her figure swallowed whole by the shadows. I stood frozen, the flashlights being trembling in my hands. Should I follow? But a primal instinct halted me. My gut twisted violently as I recalled the stories I had overheard when the search commenced, whispers of things lurking just beyond the light, of other souls lost to the woods, weaving in and out of the shrouded trees, calling for help that would never come. With a surge of adrenaline, I turned and began to retrace my steps, heart pounding, dread creeping back in. The woods felt alive around me, branches whispering secrets only they could understand. I could feel it, something was there, watching, waiting, and I was now alone. For a moment, I thought I heard that sweet, laughter-tinged whisper again, luring me back into the depths, promising revelations buried beneath deception. I shook my head, forcing myself to breathe, breaking into a panicked run. The darkness surged against me, and I was painfully aware of the shadows that clung to my back like a hungry predator. I had to get out. I had to find my way back. But even as I picked up speed, I knew that whatever had taken Jenna was not done with me yet, and the forest was just beginning to reveal its true intentions. Story 5, Destination, Dreadful Descent. The sun hung low in the sky, casting a warm glow over the idyllic landscape as we drove towards our vacation rental. My husband, Daniel, and I had been looking forward to this getaway for months, an escape from the humdrum of our everyday lives. We were miles away from the city, nestled somewhere in the remote hills of West Virginia, where the air carried the promise of freedom and adventure. The trees blurred into a sea of green as we navigated the winding road, their leaves whispering secrets I couldn't quite understand. I turned to look at Daniel, his face lit with enthusiasm, a contrast to my quiet apprehension. The further we traveled from the familiar, the more I felt an unshakable sense of unease creeping into my heart. "It's going to be great," he said, glancing at me with a grin that momentarily banished my worries. Just the two of us, away from everything. No emails, no calls, just nature. "Yeah, nature," I echoed, forcing a smile. I tried to drown out the ominous thoughts swirling in my mind. I had never been one to shy away from adventure, but this felt different. It wasn't just the isolation that bothered me, it was the feeling that something waited for us in the shadows. As we approached the rental, I noticed the owl standing alone against the backdrop of towering trees. It was an old Victorian, its paint peeling and windows darkened by time, yet strangely beautiful in its decay. A chill wound its way up my spine as I stepped out of the car, the cool breeze stirring the leaves like whispers of warning. "Look at that porch," Daniel called, his excitement infectious. "It's perfect for morning coffee." I nodded, but the knot in my stomach tightened. I followed him to the door, its heavy wood creaking ominously as Daniel pushed it open. The inside was dimly lit, the air stale, as if it had been waiting for us. Dust motes danced in the beams of light that broke through the grimy windows, revealing a clutter of antique furniture and faded photographs. "This place has character," Daniel said, stepping further into the living room. I hesitated, glancing around uneasily. The walls seemed to close in around us, the shadows shifting as if they had a life of their own. "What do you think?" "It's interesting," I replied, trying to mask my discomfort. "But maybe we should air it out." "Don't be such a spoilsport." "We can light a fire tonight," he suggested, raking his fingers through his hair. "Just think about the cozy evenings we'll have." I forced myself to smile as I unpacked our bags, but my heart raced with every creak of the floorboards. With every passing hour, the owls felt more like a cage than a retreat. The isolation was suffocating, and the silence oppressive. As night fell, we gathered around the fireplace. The crackling flames cast long shadows that danced across the walls, but the warmth did little to chase away the chill that had settled in my bones. I tried to focus on Daniel as he recounted stories of our past vacations, hilarious mishaps, delicious meals, and spontaneous adventures, his laughter echoing in the stagnant air. But the laughter faded when the lights flickered and dimmed, plunging the room into near darkness. I glanced at Daniel, my heart racing. He looked up, confusion etching his features. "Probably just an old wiring issue," he said, but I could hear the uncertainty in his voice. When the power finally went out, the owls succumbed to an eerie silence. We lit candles, their flickering flames casting long shadows that warped and twisted across the walls. I felt a tightening in my chest, as if the very air had been stolen from the room. "We should have brought more candles," Daniel said, placing one on the rickety table. I could barely hear him over the incessant sound of my heartbeat. "I didn't think we'd need them," I replied, my voice trembling slightly. "Maybe we should just..." A noise interrupted me. A hollow thud echoed through the house, seemingly coming from upstairs. My breath caught in my throat. "Did you hear that?" I whispered, my eyes wide. Daniel froze, his expression shifting from casual intrigue to concern. "It's probably just the owls settling," he offered, but the tremor in his voice contradicted his bravado. We exchanged a glance, the kind that said we both felt the heavy weight of the unknown pressing down on us. I felt myself wanting to dismiss it, to shake off the creeping dread, but I couldn't. The sound came again, clearer this time, a faint shuffling accompanied by what sounded like whispering. I strained to listen, my hair standing on end. There was something distinctly human about it, yet oddly distorted. "Let's check it out," Daniel said, rising from his seat with a forced calmness that felt brittle. I followed him reluctantly, dread coiling in my stomach as we ascended the staircase, each step creaking underfoot. The hallway was cloaked in darkness, the faint glow of our candle barely illuminating the way. The whispers grew louder as we approached the last door at the end of the hall. I could barely move, my feet frozen in place as Daniel reached for the knob. He hesitated, glancing back at me, uncertainty flickering in his eyes. "If it's just a draft or an old pipe," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. I thought about turning back, about suggesting we wait until morning, but curiosity and fear contorted into a visceral need to know. "Go on," I urged, my voice barely a whisper. With a deep breath, he turned the handle and pushed the door open. The hinges squealed in protest, revealing a dark room that felt alive, pulsating with a sinister energy. The air was thick with anticipation as we stepped inside. And then, the whispers stopped. The next morning dawned bright and deceptively peaceful. The sun climbed higher in the sky, bathing the quaint village in a warm glow. I often dreamed of escaping the monotony of life back home, and here I was, nestled in a postcard-perfect scene. Yet, a foreboding feeling simmered beneath the surface, a silent warning I struggled to ignore. I had planned a day of exploration, driven by an eagerness to uncover the charm of this foreign place. After breakfast at the inn, a plate of soggy toast and overly sweet jam, I set out. The cobblestone streets twisted like veins through the village, leading to the town square, where vendors sold trinkets and produce in a vibrant array of colors. As I wandered through the stalls, I caught snippets of conversation in a language I didn't understand. The locals often glanced my way, their eyes lingering just a fraction too long. I forced myself to smile, to engage, but the warm atmosphere felt increasingly suffocating. Something wasn't right, though it was difficult to pinpoint what exactly it was. I purchased a small wooden carving from an elderly woman whose gnarled hands trembled as she accepted my payment. Her smile was warm, but her eyes bore an unsettling depth, as if she could see into my very soul. I shook off the feeling and continued my journey, heading toward the edge of the village where the landscape opened up. A narrow path wound through a thicket of trees, promising solitude and a respite from the watchful eyes of the townsfolk. I welcomed the rustling leaves, the chirps of birds, and the earthy scent of damp soil. I was drawn deeper into the forest, each step inducing a sense of adventure that momentarily dulled my unease. But as I ventured further, the sun began to fade behind thickening clouds, casting long shadows that twisted and morphed into nearby trees. I glanced over my shoulder. The path behind me glimmered with faint traces of sunlight, but ahead lay in encroaching darkness. I hesitated, the faint whispers of wind urging me to turn back, but curiosity urged me on. I stumbled upon a clearing, a decaying cabin standing defiantly against nature's reclaiming grip. Its wooden boards were splintered and darkened, windows grimy and clouded like the secrets held within. A primal instinct screamed at me to leave, yet I stepped closer, drawn by the chilling mystery that seemed to seep from its very walls. The door creaked ominously as I nudged it open, revealing an interior coated in dust and shadows. Time had weathered the space, but remnants of life lingered: a rusted kettle on the stove, a tattered armchair facing a cold, empty fireplace. I felt like an intruder, a ghost in someone else's story. Instinctively, I turned to leave, but a noise caught my attention, a soft but distinct thud from somewhere inside. Heart racing, I stepped further inside, the door swinging closed behind me with a finality that sent shivers down my spine. As I strained to listen, the sound came again, a muffled scrape, like something dragging across the floor. My breaths quickened, the calm I had felt earlier dissipating, replaced with a primal dread. Against my better judgment, I ventured towards the sound, each step echoing my thundering heartbeat. The light filtering through the grimy windows faded, shadows lengthening and grasping at the corners of the room. Then, I saw it, a trapdoor nestled beneath a pile of old, dusty furniture. The thud came again, louder this time, and something within me compelled me to pull the door open. The hinges protested, creaking as I lifted it, revealing a dark, narrow staircase leading down into the abyss. Cold air enveloped me, carrying an odor reminiscent of decay. My instinct screamed at me to retreat, to abandon this dangerous curiosity, but I couldn't turn back without knowing. I descended slowly, the wooden steps groaning beneath my weight. At the bottom, darkness surrounded me, thick and suffocating. I fumbled in my pocket, retrieving my phone, praying for the glow of its screen to pierce the gloom. I turned it on, the light illuminating a cramped cellar filled with remnants of forgotten lives, old furniture, broken tools, and something far more unnerving, a cluster of jars lining the walls. Each jar was filled with murky liquid, and as the beam of light flickered across them, I felt bile rise in my throat. Inside the jars, things floated, discolorations and shapes I could hardly recognize. I stepped back, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. This was no ordinary cellar. It was a mausoleum of memories, of lives that had been taken and preserved in some grotesque display. Suddenly, I heard a sound above me, the unmistakable creaking of floorboards. My heart lurched. I wasn't alone. Panic surged through me, my instinct screaming for flight. I spun around, flare of light scanning the darkness for an escape route. A silhouette stood at the top of the stairs, a figure outlined against the pale light above. My blood ran cold as recognition washed over me. It was the elderly woman from the market. Her smile was gone, replaced by an expression I couldn't decipher, a mixture of something dark and predatory. "Did you find what you were looking for?" she asked, her voice a low, unsettling whisper that echoed in the confined space. I stammered, adrenaline coursing through my veins, desperate to escape. I darted past her, feeling the chill of her presence enveloping me. As I raced up the stairs, the weight of unseen eyes pressed against my back, compelling me to move faster, to flee from the unknown horror lurking behind me. I burst back into the daylight, gasping for breath, my heart pounding in my ears. But the village no longer felt like a haven. It had transformed into a wild, untamed thing, a labyrinth unraveling before me as I stumbled down the path, lost in a place that had turned into a living nightmare. The next morning, the air in the lodge felt thicker, as if it had absorbed the whispers of last night's unsettling events. I woke to the sound of wind howling outside, the trees bending and creaking under its relentless grip. My heart raced as I relived a dream I couldn't quite shake. A frantic face, twisted in anguish, beckoning me from the dark. I could still feel the chill of its breath against my neck, the weight of its gaze pressing down on me. I glanced around the cramped room, only a small lamp casting shadows along the wooden walls. It was too quiet. My companions had made plans to hike a nearby trail, but the foreboding skies hinted at an impending storm. I decided to join them, feeling that the fresh air might clear my mind. I dressed quickly, shoving my phone in my pocket, though I knew the signal was spotty at best. When I emerged into the fading morning light, the lodge seemed to loom behind me, a dark sentinel keeping watch. The others were gathered outside, their laughter echoed through the trees, yet it felt hollow somehow. I could sense their excitement, but it contrasted sharply with the unease that had settled in my stomach. "Ready, slowpoke?" Jenna called, her gloved hands on her hips, the brim of her hat shadowing her eyes. I forced a smile, even as a chill ran down my spine. Her enthusiasm felt almost foreign against the backdrop of my apprehension. We set off down the path, the crunch of leaves and twigs beneath our boots creating a rhythm that drowned out my thoughts. I fell into step behind Jenna and Mike, who were deep in conversation about their plans for the rest of the trip. Behind me, Sam lagged, fiddling with his camera, snapping photos of the vibrant autumn leaves and the distant mountains. The scenery was breathtaking, a tapestry of oranges and reds, but I could hardly appreciate it. With each step, I felt an invisible thread pulling me back to the lodge, like a tether to something sinister. The forest around us grew denser, the shadows deepening, and I began to notice the silence that encroached upon us. Even the birds had hushed their songs. "Let's take a break," Mike suggested after we had been walking for nearly an hour. We found a clearing, thick with trees that bent low as if eavesdropping on our conversation. I sat on a large rock, trying to shake the heaviness in my chest, while the others fished out snacks and water bottles. As they chatted, my eyes wandered to the edge of the clearing. Something dark flickered just beyond the trees, a movement that made my heart skip. I squinted, but whatever it had been was gone, leaving only the rustle of leaves in its wake. It was ridiculous to think anything was out there. I chided myself for letting my imagination run wild. Still, the unease lingered. "Hey, you okay?" Jenna's voice pulled me back. She was looking at me with concern, her brow furrowed. "Yeah, just tired." I forced a smile, but it felt brittle. As we prepared to head back, the wind picked up, howling through the treetops, almost drowning out the sound of Mike's voice. Once we started walking again, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The trees felt closer, their gnarled branches reaching for me like skeletal hands. I lagged behind, finally admitting that I needed a moment alone. I told the others I'd catch up and stepped off the path, hoping to shake the feeling that clung to me like a shadow. I wandered for a few minutes, breathing deeply in an attempt to calm myself. That was when I heard an eerie rustling, too rhythmic to be the wind. My heart raced as I turned, scanning the underbrush. There was nothing, just the whisper of the trees and the distant calls of my friends. Then I saw it again, a vague silhouette moving just out of sight. I stepped forward, drawn by a strange compulsion. With each step, the rustling grew louder, more insistent, as if something was trying to get my attention. I could feel the cold sweat trickling down my back. "Hey! Are you coming?" Mike's voice echoed through the trees, snapping me back to reality. I hesitated, torn between the dread that gripped me and the need to return to my friends. I called back, my voice shaky, trying to sound casual. "Yeah, just a minute." I turned to retrace my steps, but the path felt unfamiliar. Panic surged through me as I realized I couldn't remember which direction I had come from. The trees, once welcoming, now loomed like sentinels, closing in around me. I tried to stay calm, focusing on the sound of laughter and voices that echoed in the distance, guiding me back. But the laughter transformed into something distorted, an echoing mockery that sent chills down my spine. I stumbled, my heart pounding in my chest as I began to run in the direction I thought would lead me back. The forest seemed to shift, the trees bending closer, whispering secrets I couldn't hear. "Guys!" I shouted, my voice cracking. The only answer was the wind, a relentless howl that drowned out any response. I barreled through the underbrush, branches clawing at my clothes, tearing at my skin. I could feel the ground shifting beneath me, roots and stones threatening to trip me. Just as I thought I might run headlong into a clearing, I found myself stumbling back into the same spot, the trees encircling me like a cage. Despair clawed at my throat. I was lost, utterly alone, with only the mocking laughter of the forest as company. And then I felt it, a presence, cold and watching, lurking just beyond the trees. I turned and fled, my frantic breaths echoing in my ears, the forest closing in around me. The darkness was alive, and I was running out of time. The air was thick with tension as twilight descended over Morrow's Rest, painting the town in deep shadows. I hadn't slept well since my arrival, each creak of the old motel's wooden frame echoing in the silence of my room. The unsettling quiet weighed heavily on me, gnawing at the edges of my sanity. When I had booked this trip, I had expected a quaint getaway, a serene pause from the clamor of my urban life. But the isolation here felt suffocating, and something sinister seemed to lurk just out of sight. I poured myself a cup of lukewarm coffee from the motel's chipped carafe, my eyes drawn to the cracked window. Through the smudged glass, I observed the streets bathed in an eerie glow, shadows stretching and bending as the wind whispered secrets through the trees. I told myself it was just the remnants of a long day that had left me on edge, yet a chill crawled up my spine that I couldn't shake off. A knock on the door startled me. I almost dropped my mug, the coffee sloshing dangerously close to the edge. My heart raced as I approached the door, peering through the peephole. A figure stood outside, their outline barely discernible in the dim light. I hesitated, uncertainty gnawing at my decision. I had been warned to keep my doors locked, to avoid engaging with the locals. Still, curiosity won over caution as I opened the door a crack. "Can I help you?" I asked, my voice wavering slightly. The man on the other side was gaunt, his skin pale and stretched taut over his bones. His eyes gleamed with an unsettling intensity that sent shivers down my spine. He wore a faded flannel shirt and a dark baseball cap, an odd combination that seemed out of place in this already peculiar setting. "Evening," he said, his voice low and gravelly. "You're the newcomer, aren't you?" "I'm just checking in. This town can be tricky for out-of-towners." I forced a smile, battling the urge to shut the door and bolt it. "I'm fine, thanks. Just getting settled in." He nodded slowly, his gaze never wavering. "Just watch yourself, all right? Things aren't what they seem here." Before I could respond, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the encroaching darkness. The door clicked shut, and I leaned against it, my heart racing. What did he mean by that? I rubbed my temples, trying to shake off the unease. Maybe it was just the isolation getting to me, the oppressive feel of the place. I resolved to explore the town the following day. Perhaps a stroll would help clear my mind and ease the tension coiling inside me. I resolved to act like a normal tourist, even if the town felt anything but welcoming. The next morning, I stepped out into a thin mist that blanketed the streets. The world seemed muted, the sound of my footsteps swallowed by the soft earth. I wandered down the main street, my eyes darting from the weathered storefronts to the empty roads. Morrow's Rest felt suspended in time, an anachronism that barely thrived in the modern world. The few locals I encountered offered curt nods, their faces obscured by the brim of their hats or the scarves wrapped around their necks. I was drawn to an old bookstore, its sign hanging crookedly above the door. The bell jingled as I stepped inside, the scent of aged paper and dust enveloping me. The store was cramped, filled with towering shelves that leaned precariously. I began to browse, but the air grew heavier as I noticed the proprietor watching me from behind the counter. He was an elderly man, his eyes like pools of darkness, absorbing everything around him. "Looking for anything in particular?" he asked, his voice as rough as the weathered bindings on the books. "No, just browsing," I replied, feeling an unsettling weight as his gaze lingered too long on me. "Be careful in this town. Some stories are better left unread." His words hung in the air like the dust motes swirling in the light streaming through the grimy windows. I left the store feeling more uneasy than ever, my mind racing with thoughts of cryptic warnings and unseen dangers. I couldn't shake the feeling that Morrow's Rest was hiding something, a darkness that ran deeper than I could fathom. As evening approached, I found myself drawn to a small diner, the only place that appeared to have any warmth. The neon sign flickered above the entrance, casting a sickly glow onto the cracked pavement. I stepped inside, the bell above the door jingling softly. A few patrons sat scattered throughout the booths, their faces turned down, sipping coffee or staring vacantly at half-eaten meals. I took a seat at the counter, feeling the weight of their stares as I ordered. The waitress, a tired-looking woman with deep lines etched into her face, set a cup of coffee in front of me, her expression distant. "Out-of-towner?" she asked, as if the question was obligatory. I nodded, trying to muster a smile. "Just visiting." "Be careful," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "People here don't take kindly to strangers." I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up, my instinct screaming at me to leave. But I stayed, pretending to be invested in my coffee. I couldn't shake the feeling that the town was a web, slowly drawing me in, and I was the unsuspecting fly. Suddenly, I heard a commotion outside. The door flew open, slamming against the wall as a woman rushed in, her face pale and wild. She glanced over her shoulder, eyes wide with fear. "They're coming," she gasped, breathless. Panic rippled through the diner. Conversation ceased as all eyes turned to her. I felt my heart pound in my chest, my body frozen in place. The woman's gaze found mine, and she mouthed a single word, "Run." Before I could react, the door swung open again, and a group of men filed in, their faces hardened and eyes filled with an unsettling intensity. I felt the room constrict around me, the walls closing in as I realized I was trapped. Morrow's Rest had revealed its true nature, and I knew I was far from safe. The afternoon sun clouded the horizon, its dying light casting elongated shadows that danced across the cobbled streets of the town. I pulled my coat tighter against the chill that seemed to seep from the very stones of the ancient buildings. It felt as though the town itself was alive, breathing a thin mist that clung to my skin, swirling with the scent of damp earth and decay. I had come to this place seeking adventure, but now it was clear that I had stumbled into something far darker. The plan had been simple, a weekend getaway, a chance to escape the monotony of my life. The travel brochure promised quaint charm, a picturesque village with friendly locals and delicious food. Instead, I found myself wandering a claustrophobic maze of narrow alleys and hidden corners, each twist revealing more unsettling sights. The store windows were filled with dusty relics, their surfaces marred by years of neglect, while the faint sounds of laughter echoed from behind closed doors, twisted into something sinister. I recalled my encounter with the innkeeper, a gaunt woman with sunken eyes who had greeted me with a smile that didn't reach her lips. She had handed me a key to a musty room on the second floor, warning me to keep my windows shut at night. "The nights can be unpredictable here," she had said, her voice low as though sharing a dark secret. A chill had run down my spine, but I brushed it off as the ramblings of a superstitious local. Now, I stood under the fading light, grappling with an unsettling feeling that refused to shake loose. I decided to explore further, driven by curiosity and that nagging sensation in my gut. Every step I took felt heavier, laden with an unspoken dread that seemed to pulse in the air around me. I turned a corner and found myself in front of a small tavern, its sign swinging lazily in the evening breeze, the word welcome barely legible against the fading wood. Inside, the atmosphere was thick and smoky. A handful of patrons sat huddled around tables, their conversations hushed. As I made my way to the bar, the murmured words quieted, eyes narrowing in my presence. I ordered a drink, trying to ignore the prickling sensation that crawled across my skin. "What brings you here?" the bartender asked, his voice gravelly. I noticed a faint scar running down the left side of his face, an odd reminder of a past I could only guess at. "Just passing through," I replied, forcing a smile. "Few make it through here without a reason," he said, his eyes narrowing further as if he could see right through me. "Be careful. Some things are best left undisturbed." The gears in my mind turned, the words sinking in as a sense of foreboding washed over me. The locals spoke in hushed tones about the woods that surrounded the town. I had seen the trees silhouetted against the sky, dark and imposing, a foreboding wall that kept something hidden just beyond my sight. As night descended, I paid for my drink and left the tavern, my heart racing as I stepped back into the chill of the night air. A thick fog had rolled in, weaving around the buildings like a living creature. I hesitated, glancing over my shoulder and feeling the weight of unseen eyes upon me. I decided it was time to return to the inn, but the streets had transformed into a labyrinth, each turn leading me deeper into the heart of darkness. The flickering street lamps cast ghostly shadows that danced at the edges of my vision, and an overwhelming sense of being followed trickled into my mind, making my pulse quicken. I turned down an alley, its mouth gaping like a wound. The sound of laughter reached my ears, incongruous against the oppressive atmosphere. Curiosity pulled me farther in, my instinct screaming for me to turn back. The laughter morphed into something more sinister, a chorus of voices tainted with malice. At the end of the alley, I spotted a gathering, a small group of townsfolk huddled around a fire, their faces illuminated by the flickering flames. They were whispering, their heads bowed together, and I felt a surge of trepidation as I drew closer. "Listen to the wind," one voice called out, trembling with anticipation. "It carries the stories of the lost." My blood ran cold as I realized they were speaking of the very individuals who had vanished from this town over the years, hikers, travelers, and even children. The stories were stitched together with fear, each tale more grotesque than the last. I lingered, captivated and horrified, until one of them looked up and met my gaze. A silence fell over the group as a collective awareness washed over them. I stumbled back, panic clawing in my throat as they began to rise, their faces twisted into masks of something that resembled hunger. I turned to run, and the mist closed around me like a shroud, disorienting me. I could hear their footsteps echoing behind me, a cacophony of soft thuds that quickened my heartbeat. The shadows stretched and twisted, reaching for me, and as I fled, a cold hand brushed my shoulder. I screamed, a sound swallowed by the fog, and I sprinted toward the inn. The laughter faded to a low murmur behind me, but it felt like I could never escape their eyes, always watching, always waiting. When I burst through the door of the inn, I slammed it shut and leaned against it, gasping for breath. The warm air did little to ease the chill that had settled in my bones. I locked the door and stared at my reflection in a cracked mirror hanging near the entrance. My face was pale, eyes white with terror. I vowed never to venture out at night again, but deep down I knew it wouldn't matter. I was already ensnared in their web, a pawn in a game I didn't understand. As I climbed up to my room, the whispers of the woods outside taunted me, nearly a breath away, a reminder that in this town, the shadows never truly rested. Story 6, The Tenant Beneath the Floorboards. It was a deceptively quiet evening when I first noticed the cracks in the walls. I had moved into the old brownstone on Hawthorne Avenue just a month prior, eager to escape the chaos of city life. The building, with its faded brick facade and ornate ironwork, had an unsettling charm that spoke to me, as if it promised a refuge from the world. My landlord, Mr. Galloway, had seemed amiable enough during our initial meeting, his jovial demeanor a stark contrast to the creaky floors and dim hallways that awaited me within. The first few nights, I felt a certain thrill living alone, the novelty of solitude wrapping around me like a warm blanket. I decorated my small apartment with thrifted finds, tattered books, worn-out chairs, and plants that thrived despite my neglect. It quickly became a cozy nook, a sanctuary from the daily grind. But soon, the thrill faded into a creeping unease as I began to notice the peculiarities that accompanied my new home. It started with the sounds. At first, they were merely the building settling, pipes clanging and wood groaning. But then there were whispers, soft and insistent, that seemed to echo from the walls themselves. I dismissed them as products of my imagination, remnants of the eerie silence that enveloped me each night. After all, old buildings have a character of their own, don't they? But when I sat in the living room, immersed in a book, I sometimes felt eyes on me, an invisible weight pressing against the air. One evening, as I prepared to retire for the night, a series of dull thuds jolted me from my reverie. They came from the apartment above mine, where an elderly woman named Mrs. Lindquist lived. I had only exchanged a few words with her, but her frail frame and sad, vacant gaze lingered in my mind. I wondered if I should check on her. After all, she had seemed unwell during our brief encounter, but the thought of disturbing her felt intrusive. Instead, I turned off the lights and crept into bed, burying myself beneath the covers, hoping to drown out the relentless noises. The next day, Mr. Galloway stopped by to collect rent. He had a habit of arriving unannounced, slipping into my apartment as if he owned the place. He was an imposing figure, tall and wiry, with a mop of graying hair that made him look older than his years. "How's everything going, darling?" he said in his thick, gravelly voice. I forced a smile and assured him I was settling in nicely. I wanted to ask him about the sounds, the unsettling feeling that clung to the space, but I hesitated. What if it was just me? I didn't want to come off as paranoid. After our brief conversation, I returned to my routine, trying to ignore the whispers that seemed to grow louder. One night, as the wind howled against the windows, the sounds escalated. They started as low murmurs, then transformed into a cacophony of indistinct voices. I pressed my ear against the wall, straining to hear the words, but they slipped away like smoke, leaving only a chilling sense of dread. As days turned into weeks, I tried to rationalize my fear. The building had a history. I was simply letting my imagination run wild. I read up on its past, hoping to find solace in its stories, but what I discovered only deepened my unease. Rumors surrounded the brownstone, whispers of previous tenants disappearing under suspicious circumstances, echoes of arguments that had turned violent behind closed doors. The more I learned, the more the walls seemed to breathe, alive with the weight of secrets. Then one afternoon, as I returned from work, I found a letter slipped under my door. It was unaddressed, as if written for no one in particular. The hurried scrawl read, "Leave while you can. They don't let go." I stared at the words, my heart racing as a chill slithered down my spine. It felt like a warning, and I considered packing my things that very moment. But where would I go? My finances were sparse, and the thought of moving again filled me with dread. That night, I lay awake, the shadows in my room stretching and shifting as if they had a life of their own. The whispering became a chorus, an agonizing melody that filled my head. I thought of Mrs. Lindquist upstairs, wondering if she too felt it. It crossed my mind to knock on her door, to seek solace in numbers. But the thought of what lay between us, the space saturated with dread, held me back. Finally, after what felt like hours, I drifted into an uneasy sleep, the whispers fading to a dull hum in my mind. It was a restless night filled with nightmares, faces twisting in agony, rooms I couldn't escape, and the incessant thudding from above. I awoke to the cold light of dawn, the weight of unease still heavy in my gut. The next morning, I resolved to confront Mr. Galloway. I needed answers. I walked down the dim hallway with purpose, each step echoing as if the building itself was holding its breath. I knocked on his office door, heart pounding. When he answered with that same disarming grin, my resolve faltered for just a moment. "Mr. Galloway," I began, but the words felt trapped in my throat. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to continue. "I've been hearing some strange noises lately." Before I could finish, he cut me off, his smile fading. "Old buildings have a way of playing tricks on the mind, dear. You just need to get used to it." His tone was patronizing, and an unsettling chill washed over me. I could sense the invisible barrier growing between us, despite the physical distance. I tried to push aside the unease, but something within me was unsettled. As I turned to leave, I could feel his eyes watching me, an unshakable pressure that lingered long after I stepped back into my apartment. That night, determined to reclaim my sense of safety, I sat with my back against the door, armed with a flimsy resolve. But as darkness enveloped the building, I knew in my heart the horror was only just beginning, and that the whispers would never let me go. The night after my first unsettling encounter with Mrs. Hargrove, sleep came reluctantly. I lay in bed, the shadows of the room dancing on the walls, my mind replaying the moment when my landlord had leaned too close, her breath tinged with something metallic. I had dismissed it as a figment of my imagination. Surely, I was just tired, right? But as the darkness closed in around me, it was hard to shake the feeling that something about her was off, like a discordant note in an otherwise pleasant melody. I awoke the next morning to a feeble light filtering through the curtains, the sun barely making an effort to rise. My apartment felt colder than usual. I pulled myself out of bed and noted the chill in the air. A refreeze of the thrill from the previous night seeped through my mind. I tried to brush it aside, focusing instead on the mundane tasks of the day ahead. In the days that followed, Mrs. Hargrove's peculiarities became more pronounced. She would appear at odd hours, sometimes with a knock that carried an unsettling urgency. Just as I would be settling into my routine, cooking dinner or washing dishes, her presence would loom at the door, her figure obscured by the peeling, faded paint of the hallway. During one such visit, she carried a container wrapped in brown paper. "I brought you some stew," she said, her voice suddenly sweet, almost too sweet. "You look like you could use a good meal." I hesitated, looking at the container with suspicion. It was the kind of gesture that felt forced. "Thank you, but I'm not really hungry," I replied, trying to keep my tone polite. "Nonsense," she insisted, her smile stretching unnaturally across her face. "I make the best stew in the neighborhood. You must try it." A chill crept down my spine as I took the container, feeling the warmth radiate through the paper. It felt almost alive in my hands. I closed the door quickly, shutting out her persistent smile, and set the stew aside on the kitchen counter. I was not ready to confront whatever she had cooked, and even less so the unsettling intentions behind it. That evening, I stared at the container for hours, its contents an uninvited temptation. The aroma wafted through the apartment, a rich mixture of spices and something heavy and savory that teased my senses. I shook my head, pushing back the familiar pang of hunger, trying to quell the urge. I needed to resist. The memory of Mrs. Hargrove's unsettling eyes haunted me, their depth suggesting secrets buried deeper than the foundation of the building itself. I noticed how neighbors averted their gazes whenever she was around, how they rushed to their doors the moment she walked by, as if a dark cloud had just passed overhead. On the fourth night following that first encounter, I finally gave in. The aroma had lured me into its trap, and I justified my decision as a simple act of curiosity. I grabbed a spoon and opened the container, the steam rising to envelop me in a rich, almost intoxicating warmth. I scooped a small portion into a bowl, the stew glistening and thick with what I imagined to be tender chunks of meat and vegetables. I took a tentative bite. The flavors exploded in my mouth, an unexpected delight. It was unlike anything I had tasted, both savory and sweet, with an undercurrent that sent shivers down my spine. I found myself faltering, chewing slowly, savoring the richness. Then, as if the first taste had awakened something within me, I dove in deeper, spoon after spoon, the warmth spreading through me like a blanket. But with each bite, I felt an unease growing in my gut, a knot twisting tighter. I wasn't just consuming the stew, I was being consumed by it. An unsettling thought wormed its way into my mind, a whisper that made me question its ingredients. I pushed the bowl away, nausea creeping out my throat as I struggled to digest the implications of what I had just eaten. The following days seemed to blur together, each one marked by a nagging discomfort that settled deep in my bones. I returned to my routine, but the air felt heavier, tinged with a sense of dread every time Mrs. Hargrove appeared. Each encounter chipped away at my resolve, a gnawing reminder that I was not in control of my surroundings. I needed to know more about her. It occurred to me that perhaps I could find solace in the stories I could unearth from my neighbors, the ones who seemed so eager to avoid her. The day became a mission, a small flicker of determination igniting within me. I approached Mrs. Richards, an elderly woman who lived one floor below me and often sat on her porch, knitting with a glimmer of mischief in her eyes. "Do you know anything about Mrs. Hargrove?" I asked, careful to keep my tone casual. She looked up, her eyes narrowing as if she had just caught a whiff of something unpleasant. "That woman? Best to keep your distance, dear. They say she's been here longer than most of us. No one knows where she came from." "Why do you say that?" Mrs. Richards shrugged, her knitting needles clicking together. "People who live long enough hear things. They say she used to have a family, but they disappeared. Some say it was her doing." My heart raced at the implications, pounding against my chest like a caged animal. With each word, the shadows of suspicion deepened, making my own apartment feel like a trap. I thanked Mrs. Richards and retreated to my room, a wave of nausea washing over me as I replayed her words. That night, as I lay in bed, the rhythmic creaking of the building enveloped me in a cocoon of anxiety. I closed my eyes, but sleep felt like a distant memory. I couldn't shake the feeling that Mrs. Hargrove was watching, waiting for me to slip back into the warmth of her strange stew, unaware of the darkness that simmered just beneath the surface. The next morning brought with it an uneasy haze that clung to me as I navigated the rhythmic creaking of the old floorboards in my tiny apartment. I had not slept well, haunted by the vision of Mr. Hargrove's twisted smile as he had outlined the house rules. My mind replayed our last conversation like a broken record, each word tainted by a sense of foreboding that I couldn't shake. I stepped into the kitchen, where sunlight streamed through the window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. I poured myself a cup of coffee, the rich aroma momentarily calming my racing thoughts. But it didn't last long. The memories of last night were still fresh, gnawing at my sense of security. I had barely gotten to know my landlord, but each moment in his presence had left me feeling off balance. The sound of a door creaking open made my heart race. I turned, half expecting to see him standing at the threshold. Instead, it was Clara, a fellow tenant whose presence had been a comfort since I moved in. She was new to the building, and we often shared tales of our lives over coffee. Today, however, she seemed different. "Did you hear that sound last night?" Clara's voice was shaky, eyes darting around as if she expected someone or something to be lurking in the shadows. I nodded, trying to suppress a shiver. "You mean the thumping?" "Yeah, I heard it. I thought it was just the old plumbing or something." Clara shook her head, her face pale. "It wasn't just the plumbing. It sounded like someone was moving around upstairs, but I know no one's living up there." Her words sent a chill down my spine. The upper floors had been empty since my arrival. I recalled my landlord's vague answers when I had inquired about them. It was as if he had been deliberately avoiding the topic, like a spider weaving a web around a potential threat. We should ask Mr. Hargrove about it, I suggested, but Clara looked at me as if I'd suggested we go jump off a cliff. I don't want to get him involved, she whispered, glancing over her shoulder. He gives me the creeps. That was an understatement. As we shared our fears, I felt the walls of the apartment closing in on me, the air thick with tension. I wanted to believe it was just our imaginations, but Clara's presence gave voice to my own unease. I had seen Mr. Hargrove peeking out from the shadows of his office, watching us as if we were mere pieces in a game he was playing. As days passed, the unsettling sounds continued. I found myself waking up in the middle of the night, heart racing, convinced I could hear footsteps above me. I tried to rationalize it. Perhaps the building was simply settling, or the wind was playing tricks on my ears. But every time I closed my eyes, I could feel his eyes on me, a weight pressing heavily against my chest. One evening, I finally decided to confront Mr. Hargrove. I marched down the narrow hallway to his office, the walls lined with faded photographs of past tenants. They stared back at me with vacant expressions, as if they were warning me about the man who stood behind the door at the far end. I knocked, my knuckles barely grazing the wood before the door swung open. Mr. Hargrove stood there, his face twisted into a smile that sent a shiver down my spine. "Ah, my favorite tenant. What can I do for you?" His voice was syrupy sweet, too pleasant for my liking. "I wanted to ask about the noises," I began, my voice steady despite the knot in my stomach. "Is someone living upstairs?" He paused, his smile faltering for the briefest moment before he recovered. "Just a little maintenance work, my dear. Nothing to worry about." The way he said it, with that slight edge of irritation, made me feel small, insignificant. I forced a smile, trying to mask my discomfort, but I could feel the tension crackling in the air around us. "Thank you," I murmured, stepping back to leave. As I turned, something caught my attention, a faint noise coming from behind the closed door of his office. A muffled cry, perhaps. It sent a bolt of electricity through my veins, and I paused, torn between curiosity and fear. "Is everything all right in there?" I asked before I could stop myself. Mr. Hargrove's eyes hardened, and the warmth drained from his expression. "Everything is perfectly fine, thank you." I stumbled back, unnerved, and he watched me with an intensity that felt like a predator zeroing in on its prey. I practically fled down the hallway, my heart racing in my chest. Returning to my apartment, I found Clara waiting for me, her expression grave. "You can't trust him," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've been looking into the building's history." "What do you mean?" I asked, intrigued and terrified at once. She leaned in closer, her eyes wide and filled with urgency. There were reports of strange occurrences, tenants going missing. Some were never found. I think he's hiding something." As Clara spoke, a chill settled in my bones. Every instinct told me to leave, to pack my things and escape this building before it swallowed me whole. But I felt rooted in place, as if the walls themselves were holding me captive. That night, I lay in bed, the silence pressing down on me like a weight. The faint sound of footsteps echoed above me, but this time, I didn't dismiss them. I listened closely, straining to distinguish what was real and what was imagined. I could almost make out words, whispers entwining with the creaks of the wooden beams. My heart raced as I turned on the lamp, casting a warm glow that felt feeble against the encroaching darkness. I wanted to crawl under the covers and hide, but something deep inside urged me to face the terror that had taken root in my mind. In that moment, I realized I was now alone. Whatever was hidden in this building was drawing closer, and I could already feel its cold breath at my neck. The sun dipped beneath the horizon as I returned home, casting elongated shadows that danced across the cracked pavement of the parking lot. My heart sank with the fading light, and the uneventful days had begun to blur into a disquieting routine. Each creak of the floorboards echoed through my mind like a haunting reminder of my landlord's menace. He seemed to seep into the very walls of my apartment, a sinister presence lurking just beyond the threshold of my sanity. I stepped up the stairs, the worn carpet fraying underfoot, and paused at the door to my unit. The familiar unease twisted in my stomach as I fumbled for the keys in my pocket. It had been days since I'd last seen Mr. Grayson, my landlord, but his absence only amplified my anxiety. I could still hear his voice, his hollow laughter when I mentioned repair requests that were either ignored or dismissed with a wave of his hand. This building, my home, felt more like a cage, and he was the warden. The door creaked open, and I was greeted by the stale air of my apartment, thick with the scent of mildew and something else, something sweet that made my skin crawl. I stepped inside, locking the door behind me, my heart racing. An instinct whispered that I wasn't alone, that someone had invaded my sanctuary while I was away. I glanced around, half expecting to see Mr. Grayson leaning against the wall, a predator watching its prey. The chill in the room deepened as I noticed the glaring absence of my belongings. The furniture was in disarray, the sofa was shifted towards the window, the coffee table overturned, and the curtains flapped like restless spirits. Panic clawed at me. Had someone broken in? I scanned the room, each creak of the floor echoing louder until it became a drumbeat in my ears. I mustered the courage to step further inside, taking slow, deliberate breaths to quell the rising tide of fear. On the kitchen counter, a note lay in the dim light, the scrawl barely legible. I picked it up with trembling fingers, my eyes racing over the words. "Control your noise. You're disturbing the others." I swallowed hard, the words tumbling through my mind like a death knell. Who were the others? My heart raced as I considered the implications. The building was old, a relic that had seen better days, but it was home. Or at least it had been. Now it felt like a prison, and Mr. Grayson was the jailer, watching and waiting for me to slip up. I heard a noise from the living room, a soft shuffling that echoed in the silence. My body froze, paralyzed by fear, then compelled by a morbid curiosity. I stepped slowly toward the sound, my breath shallow, each heartbeat resonating like thunder in my ears. The shadows clung to the walls, stretching and twisting as the last vestiges of daylight waned. As I peered around the corner, my heart dropped. There, in the dim light, stood a figure hunched over my overturned coffee table, rummaging through the contents that had spilled across the floor. The silhouette was thin, almost skeletal, and cloaked in a tattered sweater. I could feel the air grow colder as I whispered, "Who are you?" The figure turned, revealing a gaunt face with hollow eyes, devoid of life yet shimmering with unsettling awareness. A low chuckle escaped its lips, a sound that sent icy tendrils of dread curling through my spine. "Just one of the others," it rasped, its voice a grating whisper that clawed at the back of my mind. My instincts kicked in. I surged backward, nearly tripping over the threshold to the hall. "Get out!" I shouted, the words like a lifeline to my sanity. But the figure only laughed, a chilling sound that echoed through the empty rooms of my apartment. "Mr. Grayson invited us," it replied, its smile stretching too wide, revealing teeth that were yellowed and jagged. "He said you needed company." A wave of nausea swept over me. This was no random intruder. This was part of the landlord's cruel design. My heart raced as I bolted for the door, but the figure lunged, its bony fingers reaching out to grasp my arm. I twisted away, the grip like ice against my skin, and stumbled backward. "Help!" I screamed, panic flooding my veins. But the figure merely laughed again, a sound that morphed into a cacophony of voices, all whispering my name, all echoing the same warning. I dashed toward the back door of my apartment, desperate to escape the madness. I could still hear the laughter, a chorus of voices that melded into one. "You can't leave us," they taunted. "You belong here with us." Just as I reached for the door handle, I felt a sharp tug on my hair, pulling me back with surprising strength. I screamed, the sound echoing off the walls, but it was swallowed by the laughter that consumed me. I twisted free, slamming the door behind me, panting as I stumbled down the hall. I didn't stop until I reached the stairs, my heart racing. I couldn't go back to my apartment. I couldn't face the nightmare that had taken root within those walls. And then I remembered Mr. Grayson's face, the smile that twisted his features, the way he watched me with predatory glee. I fled down the stairs, racing toward the front door of the building, the laughter still ringing in my ears. I burst into the night, the cool air biting at my skin, but I didn't stop. I didn't look back. I just needed to escape, to put distance between myself and whatever darkness Mr. Grayson had unleashed. My home, my refuge, had become a labyrinth of horror, and I was lost within it. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the peeling walls of my apartment. After the confrontation with Mr. Hall, the weight of his words lingered in my mind, twisting into something darker, something I couldn't quite shake off. I had considered moving out, but the thought of facing him again filled me with dread. Each creak of the old building echoed through the halls, amplifying every whisper of uncertainty that filled my head. For days, I had tried to ignore the unease that gnawed at me. I filled my evenings with mundane chores, dishes piled high in the sink, laundry forgotten in the basket, but nothing could drown out the feeling that I was being watched. The way Mr. Hall had stared into my eyes, as if peering into my very soul, made me wonder how long he had been keeping an eye on me. His demeanor had shifted from the eccentric, albeit troublesome, landlord to something far more sinister. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table, the city's distant noises muted by the thick walls surrounding me. A flickering candle illuminated the space, casting eerie shadows that danced along with my growing paranoia. I grabbed my phone to call Ella, my best friend, but hesitated. What could I tell her? That I was afraid of my landlord? That I felt trapped in a web of his making? I couldn't articulate the sense of claustrophobia and impending doom that hung in the air like a thick fog. I tossed the phone aside and turned to the window. The streetlights had come on, their glow revealing the dilapidated building across the street. It had been abandoned for years, yet sometimes I swore I could see movement behind the cracked windows. I shook my head, forcing myself to breathe deeply. I was being ridiculous. There was nothing there, just an old shell of a building that had long since crumbled to dust. The following day, I decided to confront my fears and venture out. I had always been the type to face challenges head-on, but the thought of walking past Mr. Hall made my skin crawl. I tucked a few essentials into my bag, telling myself a short walk would do me good. Maybe I could grab a coffee at the little cafe down the street and drown the unease in caffeine. As I stepped outside, a chill brushed against the back of my neck. I glanced back at the building, half expecting to see Mr. Hall lurking in the shadows, but the entrance was empty. A sigh of relief escaped my lips, and I turned to head down the street. The air was crisp, and for a moment, I reveled in the freedom of being away from my claustrophobic apartment. But the cafe was closed, its doors boarded up and the windows painted over with a thick layer of grime. I cursed under my breath, feeling the anxiety creeping back. I walked in the opposite direction, hoping to find another place. I meandered through the neighborhood, the familiar sights now taking on an unfamiliar edge. Each alley seemed darker, each passerby a potential threat. I quickened my pace, wanting nothing more than the comfort of my own space. As I approached my building, however, unease returned tenfold. It was dusk, and the shadows seemed to lengthen, stretching across the pavement like fingers reaching for me. I saw Mr. Hall standing outside, a cigarette dangling from his lips, his back turned toward me. Should I say hello? Should I ignore him? My instinct screamed at me to turn back, but it was too late. I couldn't just run away. I had to act like I belonged here. "Good evening," I said, forcing the words out with more confidence than I felt. He turned slowly. The ember of his cigarette illuminated his face. "You're back. Didn't think you'd return so soon." His words dripped with a condescension that made my stomach turn. "Just went for a walk," I replied, attempting to sound casual. He studied me, and I could feel the weight of his gaze, sifting through my soul as if he could see all my fears laid bare. "You know, this place has a history." "A very dark history," he said, his voice a low whisper, barely masking the delight he took in my discomfort. I swallowed hard, trying to keep my expression neutral. "What do you mean?" He smiled, but there was no warmth to it. "Oh, you'll find out soon enough." I wanted to shout at him, to demand he stop torturing me with his cryptic threats, but instead, I turned and hurried inside. The door slammed shut behind me, and I leaned against it, heart racing, my mind spiraling into a dire conclusion that I had tried to avoid. I spent the night pacing, my thoughts racing. What was Mr. Hall hinting at? I pulled out my laptop, hoping to research the history he hinted at, but found no records of anything unusual. It was as if my building was a ghost, its past erased from existence. Each second stretched into eternity as I dug deeper into the void of uncertainty. The shadows deepened in my apartment, heavy and oppressive. Just when I thought sleep might come, a sharp knock at my door shattered the silence. I jumped back, my heart pounding as the sound echoed throughout the empty space. "Open up," a voice called out, deep and familiar. It was him. My blood ran cold. Fear anchored me to the spot. I didn't want to answer, didn't want to confront him again. He knocked a second time, more insistent. "I know you're in there. I just want to talk." Talk? The very idea set my teeth on edge. My mind raced with possibilities, each darker than the last. I considered escaping through the window, but the thought of facing the darkness outside was equally terrifying. "Please," he said, his tone shifting to something softer, something almost pleading. "We need to discuss the future." The future. My future. The words twisted in my mind like a noose tightening around my throat. "Go away!" I shouted, trying to summon the courage to break free from the fear that bound me. But I knew, deep down, that I was only delaying the inevitable. The truth was, I was stuck. Trapped in a cycle of dread and uncertainty, with no way out. The landlord had become the embodiment of my prison, and I was left to wonder if I would ever escape.